Combination Plaza. PNW Affliction, book number 3, by Chance Paladin, in the year 2020. All rights reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without permission from author, except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, purely coincidental. Content advisory is as follows. I write post-apocalypse stories, therefore portions of these stories are intended for mature audiences. Romance level. There's as much romance as you would expect in a typical post-apocalypse scenario. Explicit sexual acts, where included, are germane to the story and not intended to be gratuitous or fetishized. There isn't really any hard swearing worse than what you'd hear on cable. There is a moderate range of violence, as would be expected in a post-apocalypse story. However, the suffering aspects are not deliberately glamorized or embellished upon. Forward. As we get closer to the next phase in the inevitable cycle of war, peace, revolution, we notice more people looking for alternatives to the rioting and anarchy. They are tired of groups of 200 to 300 anarchists destroying cities, throwing Molotov cocktails, setting fireworks in Capitol buildings, launching fireworks into crowds of police, all while buffered by peaceful protesters. After all that, though, they still don't think it's funny to joke about hitting protesters with a car, even after they decide to take over freeways, block traffic for hours, and attack vehicles full of people. I agree that it isn't funny at all. These stories are more about being defensive, both literally and in mindset. About exhausting every other peaceful and lawful solution. About giving the other side every opportunity to choose peace over violence, and only when given no other option to let them know that they were not the only ones training. Chapter 1, Waking Up. Home, stronghold 6 months after the collapse, late spring, early summer. There I was, snuggled up in my bed, my AR next to me with all the furniture just how I like it. A fully loaded, full-size mag smacked into the mag well, propped up against my bedpost, like the good little freedom buddy that it was. Still had my old optic, though. Never did find a new optic, but I like this one, because I'd been using it for so long that I was comfortable with it. My rifle was a SWAT-style AR that was piston-driven instead of gas, so it could have a folding stock instead of just collapsible. We'd found the rifle hiding in an abandoned police station. We were clearing out in a part of the building that raiders had apparently missed. My team said I could have it, since they knew I had wanted this specific model half my life. Anyway, I'd been sleeping for a few hours of dreamless, peaceful sleep, and woke up to the agonizing sensation of sandpaper, peeling layers of skin off my face over and over again. Hi, kitty, I guess it's time to get up, huh? It was about 6 months after the collapse, and today wasn't an ordinary day. I woke up and went to the sink to half waterboard myself. Wash my face. Waterboarding is what I call washing my face with a wet washcloth, and then I checked the calendar. We used old school calendars to save what little solar electricity we could scrounge. The electrical grid was more down than it was up after the dam had been seized by the other side, and then seized by federal, and then shut down. We didn't mind. Not having power hurt the other side more than it did us anyway, so I checked the calendar off my wall, and it confirmed what I'd remembered. In the date and square, it said today was the day to do a welfare check on Combination Plaza. I checked my guard cat's food and water and topped both off. Then I gave the cat a pat on the head and continued gearing up. Well, we used cats here for pest control. We couldn't afford losing any food or gear or supplies to rodent damage, so cats were highly regarded. Getting ready to go for the day consisted of putting on thick but comfortable hiking boots and black gray digi-camo cargo pants with knee pad inserts that protected my sensitive knees. I also had a matching long-sleeve shirt made from a breathable but comfortable material that I could wear for days without it feeling gross. With that, there was also a matching hat with our zone's patch on the front and our group's name on the back, and so I put that on. I put on my gun belt, which was like a heavy strap with an over-engineered buckle, nothing fancy. Then it was time to put on my WB, or inside the waistband gear. First, I snapped on the holster for my backup sidearm, which went on my right side. It was a paddle-style holster that form-fit to my side perfectly. A friend of mine on the farm had helped me remold the Kydex so there was room at the end of it for the momentary on-off flashlight, which was more or less permanently mounted to the accessory rail. My holster was designed so I could be active without it moving around and would still be comfortable all day. On the other side, I clipped my concealed fixed-blade holster with its blade securely snapped inside. It was a short triangular blade with a handle at an odd 45 degrees. This helped both for concealability and comfort. The blade stayed there in case I needed it to help me clear my drawing arm if someone thought they were being smart by holding me down and blocking my draw. Worst case scenario, if I couldn't get to my gun arm to clear it, the knife was perfect for going to the carotid artery, as unfortunate as that was to think about. But this was the way things were now, and even though I'd had some of these tools before the collapse and even carried them, I knew the chances I would have had to use them were small. Since the events at the recycling plant, there had been many battles. With each one, there were more lessons and upgrades in gear, mindset, and training. So, for example, the single stack I used to carry with my lovely grenade grips, which was a 7+1, still with an extra extended 9-round mag within arm's reach, was now a backup that still stayed concealed, but it was used as a last resort. I could also use it to arm a second person if needed. It had saved my life many times, so it definitely wasn't going anywhere, with both my knife and a paddle holster clipped inside the waistband. How they were supposed to be, I cinched up the belt as tight as it would go. It would pretty much stay that way all day now with no problem, no matter how much I moved around. I could get it tighter if I needed to, but it would never get looser, which was great. I had a plate carrier tactical vest combo that held 6 30-round mags, a standard size for AR mags, so I put that over my shirt. I put my shoulder holster and attached mag pouch on it, which carried a full-size double-stack 9mm with a 320 model number on the side. It had a round capacity of 17+1, which was a big upgrade, but had been crucial since the initial collapse happened. My carrier also had mag pouches on the side for extra pistol mags. I could carry a lot of ammo now, and comfortably. I bumped up to a quick double stack, partially due to the increasing threat quantity, but also because I simply finally got my hands on one. Pre-collapse, I had waited too long, being without money, and eventually the double stacks were all bought up by other people, so it took a long time to find this one, and now me and my 320 were inseparable. My friends had got it for me as a surprise, and so I was thankful. The plate inserts I used in the plate carrier were carbon nanotube soft body armor panels that weighed slightly more than a t-shirt, but provided enough defensive capacity to safely stop anything short of a 50 caliber round. The ceramic plates I had in the carrier got passed on to the next person, so they could be armored. That's how we did things around here. Traditional rounds like jacketed rounds and hollow points couldn't penetrate this armor at all, keeping in mind that all rifle rounds could typically defeat regular body armor due to the speed and overall pointiness. That being said, if a round was specifically designed to defeat armor, all it managed to do was damage the nanofibers of the armor a little bit. If damaged, these fibers each had memory and would seek to mate back with their originating fiber piece and essentially could repair themselves indefinitely. The only rounds the fibers couldn't handle were incendiary or tracer rounds due to the heat that the ammo generated. Thankfully for my armor, those ammo types weren't in very wide circulation. I mean, people did have them, they just didn't use them every day, so the likelihood that I would get shot with them was slim to none. This is all keeping in mind, obviously, if you were taking a lot of hits, you were doing something wrong anyway, so I wore a piece of that armor in the front, in my carrier, and one in the back, and another in a laptop sleeve of my backpack that I wore with me everywhere. That gave me extra protection in the back in case someone tried to snipe me there. Patting myself down, I checked to make sure my IFAK or personal first aid kit was there, and it was. I passed by my trusty flashlight and wallet and phone and keys, and everything seemed to be in order. Having completed the ready muscle memory check I'd done so many times before, I kissed my kitty goodbye. As my cat looked at me as indifferently as ever, I slung my SWAT AR over my shoulder barrel down and resisted the urge to do a press check. I knew full well it had a round in the chamber and a full mag, already with the safety clearly on as always. Then I exited my tiny home to go see how the team was doing. My cat didn't try to rush outside, thankfully, but she never really did. Usually only poke her head out for a second. I guess she wanted a warm, lazy day in the house. That was fine with me. My wonderful cat must be used to the routine time-wise to wake me up, because about that time I started to hear a bugle playing first call. I always absolutely love waking up to that song in Boy Scouts at camp every summer, and this was no different. Chapter 2. Good morning. I think my favorite part at our peaceful farm was how we started every morning. The highlights of the day were that we had a flag raising every morning and a flag lowering every night. With the exception of people immediately at guard duty, everyone attended this event every morning and every night. This served an official dual purpose of showing our patriotism, but also a way for us to really break the ice with each other. Coming on every morning showed dedication to the community, and we could immediately see how everyone was doing. If someone wasn't looking well, we would know right away and could address it, for example. As everyone said good morning to each other silently with a smile and a nod, the flag is brought out. The flag is carried by one and escorted by four. Full attention turns to the morning ceremony. The flag bearers stop at the flag with two at the pole, two waiting, and one holding the flag, folded in a triangle. The two waiting begin to unfold the flag, and then the two at the pole assist in attaching the flag to the pole. Once the first portion of the flag is secured, the two at the pole begin to slowly at first raise the flag as it begins to unfurl. The two holding the flag carefully help it unfurl cleanly as the original person holding the flag continues unfolding it the rest of the way. In a couple of rotations of the flag's rope, the flag stars can be seen, and the person turning the rope stops and holds the rope in place for a moment. Then they secure it around a notch so that it cannot move. The second person at the pole stops to help secure the second portion of the flag as the wind starts to catch up and bulge the flag, giving it life. The other three patiently wait as this happens, and in only a moment the second portion of the flag is secure. The flag's line is then loosened from its notch by one of the people at the pole, and the flag continues to get pulled up to the top of the pole via pulling on the line. The three, taking every care with the flag, unfurl and loosen it fold by fold as the wind tries to take the flag for the day. The three cannot just let the flag go lest any part of the flag touch the ground, which would be very upsetting. To keep this from happening, everyone holds on to the flag, still taking full responsibility despite the wind's best efforts to smack everyone with it. With a few more careful pulls from the rope and everyone carefully letting the flag go, tiny bit by bit, eventually the flag was high enough. At that point, everyone let go and immediately saluted. We all immediately saluted as well, except for who is holding the rope raising the flag. This is when I also breathed a tiny sigh of relief because I was getting a little nervous at that part. The bugle then played reveal, and the flag rose to the top of the flagpole and then got tied off for the day. As the flag was being raised and as the bugle played and we all saluted, we also all together said the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We all let our arms rest and relax as everyone said their good mornings. Everyone was happy to be safe and free for another day. Chapter 3. The Hamlet. One of the first things to go after the collapse were the giant wasteful vanity houses. After the initial collapse, we resettled out of the suburbs to more secure and strategic locations after we had successfully defended initial advances from the other side. We had accurately predicted their advances very well and were able to defend and retreat to positions we could hold that were self-contained. After that, we basically set up little hamlets around farms, streams, and other strategic resources. This was in order to protect those areas from the other side wanting the area that had intent to either steal materials from or pay for with their new meaningless currency that they had invented. The new structures we used were either made from modified reinforced shipping containers when we could get them, or built from cinder blocks full of gravel and rebar, and insulated and closed with steel doors. We had solar panels running in when we could, attached to batteries, and then central bathrooms in the middle of the town that we maintained as a group. The most important part of these bathrooms were the ladies' bathrooms. We made sure that they had bathrooms set up exactly how they wanted, because we knew that that was the key to having a happy town. I always insisted this early on, so we set up a very elaborate draining system that was both sanitary, robust, sustainable, and, most importantly, comfortable. It was also private, so all their sanitation needs were being met the way they were used to. Some of the guys guffawed at this, but in order for the ladies to get along with the new normal, there were some compromises that had to be made, and this went a long way. Drinking water was tapped and pumped through an underwater spring. Shower water was plentiful, relatively speaking, and every home unit had their own private shower. The water for that came from the side of their house. They used collected rainwater from the roof in these 20 to 30 gallon containment units. The farm's gardens got water from the stream that ran by, and of course the constant rain. We were closer to the hills, and the clouds got trapped here, and it would rain, or there would be condensation all the time. We also had these windmill-type units that would spin and collect water in the ground during the summer months for additional water, but in the winter, that would help our drinking water to not freeze. The windmills didn't work in most areas of the world where you weren't going to get water anyway, but we ended up using them here because the tactic was to just collect the water by any means necessary. These units worked well for that in our climate. Basically, we just collected the water year-round for everything. Chapter 4, The Townsfolk. Also, this place wasn't just for our team to live. There were still farmers and barns and workers, and everyone still living in all of their places too. So far, I've only talked about the new tiny homes that sprung up. We still provided security logistics, provided mechanic assistance on farm machinery, and whatever else we could do for everyone that was here. One of the biggest things we provided was travel and trade security. We had a system that everyone was able to trade securely, since the products from the farm we supported had to make it to the main market to be traded. Everything was barter now, since none of us were welcome in any of the large cities, which we called city-states. Nobody we worked with generally accepted the new currency anyway, since the other side took over everything west of the Cascades. The only people that accepted the currency were people that could get into the large cities to use it for something, and the people in the city never really came out. That was usually because they didn't have anything to trade, and nobody out here would accept their money. So even though we would do the odd manual labor, most of the debt we paid for food was running site security and running them to the nearest hub town to trade. The hub is where all the vegetables and fruits were traded, along with any excess canned goods made at the farm. Everything the farm kept went in an underground cellar that kept at a good temperature year-round. We also smoked various proteins that the hunters caught. We called them affectionately and with the utmost respect the Fuds, who would catch, kill, fish animals and bring them back for processing and long-term storage. They were very good at this, and despite them not being tactical in their most practical hunter gear, we knew they were every bit as lethal and extremely patriotic. They were even more patient than we were, and they were a good check and balance overall arm system on the farm. We were never at odds with them, though, and it was always an equal respect, as many people on our team had been hunters and fishermen in the past. As I walked past all the townsfolk going about their daily routines, I could smell breakfast already in process and headed towards the barn, where we all had chow. Chapter 5, Breakfast with the Team. The team had grown significantly since the collapse had started, after the recycling plant incident, helping to shore up the subdivision I lived on showed how well I had worked with the on-site security station there. The community security team responsible for the area saw my potential and offered a full-time spot on the team as an analyst. I accepted the position with the caveat that I get to take my cat, which was just fine with the team, and everything worked great. Merch was exchanged, and we quickly became good friends. Our team had been very busy since the initial collapse. We were about to lock our zone down, hold the other side off, resume food operations, and reach a semblance of a new normal. There were other places that managed to hold out also. Our public relations officers had made contact with them, so we did scheduled welfare checks as part of our community outreach program. Prior to the collapse, we always work with the local LEOs, or law enforcement officers, or whatever indigenous security or military. So post-collapse, we just continued working with whoever had survived that leaned to our side, that wanted to cooperate as part of rebuilding the community. Today was one such day, so the breakfast conversation quietly revolved around that. A specific and particularly large building had asked for us to check on them once a month just to make sure nothing happened that was too big for them. The visit was also to show our support, to let everyone around them know that they had a big team supporting them, which we did, so no big deal. And as specifically for the team, we have prior military registered nurse now, a dentist assistant, prior firefighter, and several prior military people whose specific military responsibilities I didn't know, but whose experience all worked great together. It was fun just to hear them all talk to each other and make military jokes, but we didn't make jokes about them, just listened to their jokes and laughed when they laughed. I loved the warmth and camaraderie from them, even though they were all from different prior groups. But most of all, I loved to hear their military jokes. It was nice that I could analyze things from the civilian perspective, as they called it, and then they would give me the military perspective, and it would just give me a huge revelation on everything, and it would make them sort of laugh. But they knew I had a good sense of humor, and we always got a kick out of talking to each other and bouncing ideas off each other. We also had several highly trained civilians, and everyone equally respected each other, and everyone was great friends, and it worked out really well. The ego and trolls had been kicked out a long time ago, and everyone knew exactly why they were doing this, because the SOPs, standard operating procedures, had been written so well. We had someone managing comms for the team, someone managing public outreach, several people managing internal affairs, and it was all working really well, so we just had an amazing team now, and me, the analyst. I put all the processes and procedures together and tie all the pieces together on why things were probably happening to try to give a wider perspective so we would hopefully not get blindsided by fairly foreseeable events. Once everyone was about 3/4 of the way done eating, our CO got up front of the mess hall with the unofficial mayor and the original owner of the farm. That was like the three-way leadership system here. When they stood, the room immediately fell silent. Leadership had nothing negative to say. All the guys and gals were getting along. Nothing less would be tolerated. Trade was going well. We had plenty of food, plenty of ammo from trading with the other sites that made ammo. Our storage was just fine, so there wasn't anything important. They just all liked to get up there to say how good everyone was doing and thank everyone. One announcement, though: no hunting today or fishing today, and especially no mini vacations. Everyone was to stay in because a portion of the team, that's us, needs to do a welfare check on Combination Plaza. We would be gone for most of the day as per our obligation to showing support, very well armed and well trained support to this complex. Our team's leader noted, so the farm will be in a dawn to dusk curfew as of right now. There were some synchronized ahs as the speech resumed over them, as purely a precautionary measure, the unofficial mayor pointed out. Yes, our CO supported. There have been no intelligence reports to suggest, he meant, over the radio chatter at the comm station we had here, that anything bad was going to happen, but still, all of your safety is paramount to the overall mission. By the time we head out, the next shift, who was with us now eating breakfast, will be rotating to take over for the day, and you can all be on site prepared and alert to support if need be. We all know you can hold your own, no problem, so if anything happens, please just let us get out of the way first. This got lots of laughs from everyone, which was good. He meant it. Both groups here could hold their own, no problem. The reason for these extra precautions, though, still was because we had lots of food here. The large city-states still largely did not have food. They had some organic production from their urban gardens and whatever they were getting shipped by giant cargo vessels, intermittently in from the UN NATO sympathizers, which didn't accept their make-believe currency either. But they weren't getting anything from Eastern Washington or Eastern Oregon. That's where the bulk of food normally came from. Also, California Free State wasn't growing food like they used to. This was because they weren't getting water from their eastern neighbors anymore, having pissed off everyone except for Washington and Oregon when they went rogue shortly before Western Washington, and Western Oregon seceded. So resources were at a premium as far as the city-states were concerned. Raiders could theoretically attack the trading towns, but nothing of value actually sat at the towns for very long for this reason. If you thought of attacking a town during trading time, it was a bad idea. Attacking a town during then was like attacking a portion of every single resource location's armed contingent at the same time, which would be suicide. Also, the town hub was in the opposite direction of the city-state, so it would take a lot of resources for anyone to just camp it and wait for us. Nobody stayed there when we weren't there. If someone tried to hit it when we weren't there, there'd be nobody there. The first team in was a scout team that cleared it and had code phrases and comms that only a handful of people knew and that changed each month. Comms were so spread out that there would be no way for everyone to get all of the codes. It wasn't an unbreakable system, but it was so irritating that nobody even bothered attacking the town hubs. And town hubs were invite only. You had to be vouched for by one of the groups that had already been vetted. That methodology left the resource areas like our farm potential targets. The best time to come at our farm would be when we were doing external community service like these welfare checks. For this reason, we keep the dates secret from everyone but who's on our team and only tell everyone else morning of. We would also be targets en route to and from destinations. Heading out of our little hamlet towards Combination Plaza, there are 3 potential routes. We don't write down anywhere which route we're taking and never deciding until after we leave the area. When we get there, we make contact via radio on predetermined channels to help the local relationship manager. There are typically someone such as a personal friend with our community outreach officer. These 2 in particular, when they talk, have their own sarcastic code that none of us understand that seem to change unpredictably every time. If that fails for any reason, we have predetermined backup plans, entries, etc. Thankfully, it's never had to come to that, but basically the idea is to get in, re-establish contact with the original group, ensure their safety, and return authority. After that, we establish root cause, fix root cause, and then preventative measures, whatever they may be. Never had to do it, hopefully we'll never have to. Our CO continued from where he left off. I believe most of you are familiar with the process and purpose. Community outreach is very important to our ultimate directive of community rebuilding. I know many of you are here either directly or indirectly because of that process. There are many places, just like our farm here, and many places just like the building we're going to go to and check up that are around. We need to keep them safe to eventually build a new society that our children and their children will be proud of. Our CO continued some more. We are traveling to them to show solidarity in this difficult time. We told them we would check up on them, and so that's what we're going to do. If the roles were reversed, I know we would want people to come check up on us. Just like when you have a sick child or spouse in bed, they want nothing more than to have their loved one come check on them, even if they don't need anything. It's just about showing that we care, even if it isn't needed. People not caring is what got us into this mess, and there are still a few people out there that are worth caring about, even though they are not directly in our circle. He motioned out to everyone in the crowd. This was getting a good response from the crowd. I think they liked to hear his speech, so our CO continued. The place we're visiting houses a lot of people. They also protect and maintain a lot of the last running vehicles, and they also operate one of the last real hospitals. None of it's perfect, but we don't get perfect anymore. We just get the new normal. They are good, decent people. We just go over there to make sure anyone otherwise think twice. Keeps a lot of the bad guys away, knowing that they have the biggest, baddest team around on call. Our CO concluded, we'll be back before you know it, and then y'all can return to your routines. Enjoy the rest of your chow, and thanks again. He nodded to the unofficial mayor and the original farm owner, and they all nodded, smiled, shook hands, and he came back and sat down with us. We had scooped up extra food and some makeshift to-go boxes that were paper plates flipped to face each other, then we tape shot with a fork in each one. He saw that we had the food ready and nodded and asked if we were ready to go, and we were. Being ready, we all brought our plates to the kitchen where we thanked everyone for our meals and then headed out. We all said good morning to the 3 just getting off guard duty, and they returned the pleasant greeting. The 3 that had just finished their own breakfast with us handed them their food and traded places at each of their spots. Some of them already briefly hung out earlier, having doubled up briefly before sunrise for dawn patrol, since that's when visibility was at the worst, making the most likely time for attack. We had set up our schedules for that little overlap as well as another at night. We worked in the breakfast handoffs, and it seemed to work out pretty well. There was a moment of hesitation before everyone got in the truck, with us looking at the CO. He said, "Everyone cool with prayer time for a second?" Everyone nodded, with a few respectfully bowing out after nodding. This was due to having either other older religions or some being somewhere else in their spiritual journey. The phrase that was common here was that if you didn't have a religion, was that one would sooner or later find you. That sort of led to a little bit of a generic prayer, but it did the job for us. "Who wants to lead?" the CO asked. We took turns, giving everyone an equal chance to speak their heart. Nobody immediately spoke up, then two of us did at the same time. I would always just take over if nobody else did, as a sort of a reluctant leader. They told me to go ahead, and I asked if they were sure, and they said yeah, so I did. "Thanks for everything we have. Thanks that we're here together. Please help us get there and back, and please help everything be okay. And if it's our time, please help us go in peace." Then someone said, "Or at least take a bunch of them with us." Everyone, including the people outside the semicircle who had taken close but defensive positions, all said exactly. There were some appreciative thanks and some quiet amens, and that was it, pretty low-key. With nothing to report, prayer and handoffs complete, we felt complete and piled in our trucks. And finally, we headed out with the troops that had been on guard overnight and left fresh guards for the day shift. Chapter 6. The Road. We always traveled down roads with the same strategic framework. 3 vehicles, CO sitting in a random vehicle each time, us choosing from our pool of radio channels just before we leave each time, and changing it as we stop each time. Easy to remember primaries and backups. Today was a +2, -2, which meant from the origin channel we'd go up to or down to when we needed to hop channels depending on which tactic was going on. We all had our radios on and fully charged. It didn't take much power to charge them. They stayed charged for a long time, and they didn't take much power to idle. Most of us had swapped out the stock antennas now for the long whip antennas, which had better range and were flexible, which meant we didn't get constantly poked by them. They did tend to get slammed in car doors, however, but oh well. 2 of the guys had longer rope antennas that snaked through their web gear of varying lengths. They liked those best because they didn't snag and got great reception. Some of us also had expanded sized batteries, but it was still a hodgepodge of radio brands, but they all still worked on the same framework, which was cool. This made them all essentially function the same, and the comms officer could bulk program them super efficiently, which was nice for all of us. We each had an earbud for a radio, so we didn't cause tons of feedback or crosstalk with each other. Most of the time, we just listened to the orders being given anyway instead of talking. The CO could direct us which ways to go with code words, and the lead vehicle would know where it meant. We also virtually never left, but when we did, it was at random times in order to keep everyone out there waiting, just in case. This time our CO chose Route Alpha, only we would know what that meant because Route Alpha never even meant the same way twice. The lead car turned to take Route Alpha, and since that's where the lead car went, everybody followed. This might seem weird, but this process made it significantly more difficult for the other side or any raiders to set up ambushes. If they wanted to set up ambushes, they either had to set up tons of small ones or had to rapidly move to get to our route to get in front of us really fast. The other side never set up a roadside bomb technology because there was never an insurgency. We stayed out of their city-states, and we fought them off fairly easily when they tried to come for us, as we were prepared and organized. Lines were drawn, and there was never a big civil war that so many people were afraid of. That didn't mean that they were happy, though, which is why as soon as we held off their initial attacks, we pulled back to our strategic locations. They would still attack us or even capture us if they could. The thought of getting captured by them was horrifying. We had heard rumors of public tortures, executions, and even remote torture prison islands for people like us. I hope I never even had to see one of those places. They'd have to catch me first, and I was with my badass team, so I tried to keep the thought of capture out of my head, though a powerful incentive to stay vigilant. So with all that said, the other side weren't really the assassin type. They were more just tons of small bully groups that eventually formed into a large army of bullies due to having similar overarching agendas. Their main battle strategy was usually to just swarm you, wipe you out, and then take everything you had. Or they'd park at water supplies and kill everyone they didn't find attractive enough to keep as personal play toy prisoners. We might have bounties on our heads, though. There was never any real way to know without contact in their weird world. Virtually nobody came in and nobody came out. So, combined with all that, we didn't know. We were just super careful to hopefully never have to find out. In our rare travels, the big risk for us was more things like logs over the road, vehicles across the road, snipers on overpasses, things like that. It also wasn't beyond the bad guys to leave people injured or leave women or children out, knowing we might stop to lend aid and then try to set up an ambush that way. But thankfully no bombs, no destroyed bridges, roads, or overpasses. So we did the same. We never blew the bridges and left the infrastructure alone. We felt like that was our olive branch to them, that there was always the option to come back and work things out if they ever wanted to. It hadn't happened yet, but it was the unspoken rule. No bombs, leave infrastructure alone. That didn't rule out snipers, though, so we had our group's flags up high on our trucks like ships did in the ocean and always radioed ahead. But until rule of law ever got restored, unfortunately, everyone out here got treated as hostiles until proven otherwise. Also, the other side was notorious for leaving their wounded behind. Despite staying together in groups, they didn't much care for each other's safety. Wounding one to occupy two more didn't really work. You had to shoot to kill every single time. They liked to take prisoners, though, but we wouldn't have that. In regards to going from point A to point B, going under overpasses was the worst and took the longest. Our vehicle mechanic and sniper that liked to experiment had reinforced the front of our vehicles with 3 layers of bulletproof glass. We'd scavenged it from a bank building that had been burnt out. The glass could stop up to 308 AP rounds. Because of this, we were able to sit back in the vehicles and park our vehicles in sort of a W shape when it was time to stop. This allowed us to see forwards and to the sides and be protected while we scanned the overpasses. The sides of our trucks were also armored, but were more meant to be used as cover and temporary armor personnel carriers than traditional tanks. The basic plan is that we would get up on an overpass, check it out, look around, check the channels, and bio-brake if we needed to. It would be just for a minute, then we would hop back in the trucks and rinse repeat. In a normal and lawful world, it would take about an hour to get to the plaza. There were roads that allowed us to avoid most of the overpasses, so there was a possible route where it took about 2 hours to get there in the new way we had figured out that was the safest, meaning the least risk. Thankfully, in part due to our precautions, but also partially due to the general public lack of fuel, this made travel fairly safe. Maybe due to most of the troubles being contained within the major cities and bandits recognizing the branding on our vehicles, this present trip was again largely uneventful. Only at one point during one of our detour portions of the journey around an overpass did we hear some engines. We stopped, took defensive positions, and threat assessed, but no sooner heard them driving away. Our comms guy and a few others scanned the channels and reported nothing on comms. Nobody had a visual either, so we never actually saw them or heard anything from them. It is possible, though, that they were headed in the direction we were going to, based on where their engine sounds were trailing off to. We headed the final few miles to our last checkpoint with no more events of interest. As soon as we arrived, our comms guy indicated to our CO that we should be within range. We weren't using ham channels or repeaters, so we had to be in line of sight, and we were. Chapter 7. radio contact. So with that, he reached out to his contact for the handshake. This was always amusing for us because nobody had any idea what he was going to say. We all visually scanned the area for threats and took no laziness despite the area's familiarity. The area provided a natural comfort, and we had a clear line of view in all directions. We had strip maps and topo maps. It was well surveyed by earlier visits. One guy was out with binoculars checking other high spots. It was trying to be a clear day, but the clouds were taking over. We sat upon a heavily defensible spot higher up than everyone else around. We would be able to spot snipers easily, but they would have a hard time spotting us. High ground is good. As we scanned for potential threats, we heard the first part of the handshake come from our public outreach officer. Go through. Romeo, this is Juliet. Romeo, this is Juliet. Do you copy? There wasn't anything at first. We never knew exactly when we were going to get there, only the day was scheduled. It was pre-scheduled based on the prior visit, and only their contact and team knew. And our team knew, so it wasn't unusual for the handshake to take at least a few seconds for a response, but never more than that. Our side repeated, clearer this time. Romeo, this is Juliet. Do you copy? He looked at us and shrugged. We still didn't have visual line of sight of the place, as it was still several miles away and the roads were winding. But the radios technically had line of sight. The strongest radios were installed on the truck and could reach out through even the heavy forest that had started to grow and beamed above the dilapidated towns out 10 miles or sometimes if we got, or more sometimes if we got high enough. Finally, after about 30 seconds, the CO said, try them again, and if we don't hear anything, we'll go with Plan Charlie. That meant to assume the place had been compromised with no communication of which to verify. Our contact was about to start radioing them back when a female voice came over our headsets. This is Julie, I copy. We all looked at our outreach officer like, what the hell? When we all went back to look back to where... then we all went back to look back to where we were supposed to be. To our comms guy's credit, he took it completely professionally and in stride, and said calmly, Hello, Julie. I hope you are having a nice day today. I was wondering if the boss was around. Is he around? Over. Julie didn't respond for maybe 20 seconds, but it could have been shorter or longer as time seemed to freeze. Then finally, Sorry, the boss is sick. In fact, we're all sick. You should stay away because we're very sick, very sick. I have to go, sorry. And that was it. Our CO said to our outreach officer, well, what do you make of that? It was a half question and half WTF. To which he responded, well, first of all, I don't know anyone there named Julie. He said plainly as if stating a fact, but not putting any additional story together quite yet. The CO then responded, well, we can't go with Plan Bravo then. That was if we make contact, but it's still compromised. Because they're contaminated. We risk contaminating our own colony. Suggestions? I already knew the answer to this because I had studied these scenarios many times prior to the collapse. You have to have someone enter the quarantine zone with a radio, establish contact, threat assess, etc., then relay information back so you can actually figure out what's going on. Otherwise, you risk both contaminating your group and introducing your contaminants with theirs and making them even more sick in their weakened state. I stood forward and offered, I have a suggestion. I have been getting sick my entire life and nothing life-threatening has ever happened. If anyone's going to risk it, and best to analyze the situation, it should be me. I have a radio full kit medical in my 72-hour bag, so what if I go in? If the place has been infiltrated, I'll call you guys in to wipe out the bad guys. And we'll all get sick. Radio the farm from a safe distance, and I'll let them know whatever the new plan will be. Nobody said anything, so I continued. If the building hasn't been infiltrated and they're sick, at least only I'll be sick. That way you guys can quarantine me by myself, driving me home outside the truck or something until I get better back at the farm. where I will just stay in my tiny home. About half their mouths dropped and the other half just face palmed, as they usually did whenever I came up with stuff like this. The CO said, "Anybody else?" Nobody said anything, so the comms officer double-checked my channels with me, and everyone spared me a few snacks from my bag with the room I had left, and we split off into groups to get ready. Chapter 8, Parting Ways. "Oh, before you leave," the comms officer said, "we just found a stash of higher quality mics. They're going to be better than your crappy stock mic you've been using, and at least now you'll have a spare. We've got one for everybody and reserved one especially for you. I've seen a few people with them, so I sort of understood how they worked and didn't want to look stupid like I didn't know. I unpackaged it and looped it under my outer clothing and around my neck where the mic hung, and put an earpiece in my ear. Then I put the packaging in my pocket." Our comms officer continued, "It will feel like a baby is choking you for a little bit, but after a while you won't even realize it. You can talk to us completely normal and we'll be able to hear you way better. Also, you'll be able to hear us significantly better because the earbud is much higher quality too." I let him know I was thankful. Then the CO said, "Don't forget protocol. Establish if there actually is a virus and let us know. Establish if there actually is a human threat and let us know. You're going to take the scenic route. We'll establish a forward position to make sure hopefully nobody's paying attention to your entry." At that point, the outreach officer comms guy gave me an entry card and said, "This works for the basement parking garage. It isn't on the same system as everything else, so most people won't know how to shut it off if there are bad guys. Hopefully it gets you in." He handed me a second piece of paper with a PIN number on it, and then the CO said, "We'll get closer to make sure comms work solid and make sure we can actually offer support. Any questions?" I couldn't think of any questions or anything in particularly sarcastic to say. I thought about asking more about the security chief so I would know how to make contact, but I knew some of it and could figure out the rest later. "I'm good, guys, I think," I said, then said, "Check, check, 111 into my mic." They gave me a thumbs up. One of them said 5x5 back. Two more bobbed their heads, and one gave me a thumbs up. I nodded back in appreciation. "Sounds good," RCO said. "Radio silence for about 30. We'll set up a forward position and defensive perimeter. That should give you time to hike around and get to the basement. Check your watch. We'll plan on reestablishing radios then, okay?" I looked down at my watch. I was finally able to get one of those shockproof watches again like I'd had as a kid, with helpful things that I actually needed to know. They'd fallen out of style when smartphones came in, but as the collapse got closer, everyone realized these were the way to go. I hadn't been able to get one because of money, but the guys knew I was without and found one for me. We held our watches up to each other, and sure enough, they were synced, even though we knew they would be. These watches auto-synced with each other, among all kinds of other things they could do. The watches were in fact synced down to the millisecond, which was mesmerizing to watch if you let it absorb you. They also absorbed sunlight and body heat to power themselves, and a battery backup inside, and essentially could run for eternity. I took a mental note of when a half hour from now would be and said, "Okay, sounds good," to the guys. With nobody saying anything else, I gave them a snappy salute just for fun, waved, and said I would talk to them online in a little bit, and then I walked down a path nearby. With each step I took, I could hear them starting to talk. They were presumably going over the plan, and within a minute I heard them load up and slowly and meticulously start to make their way forward. One truck scooting forward while the other covered, and vice versa. It was slow, but the safest. Chapter 9, Walking Alone to the River. It was beginning to be a sunny day. Not warm, but definitely pleasant to be outside. The birds were singing about something, but I didn't notice anything else in the way of wildlife. Was the apparent reduction due to hunting or trapping? Or maybe just no critters were out yet? I wasn't sure. It was probably just my imagination, but I thought for sure I would notice a squirrel or something furry running around by now. Spring was very much letting me know that it was the current season, though, and I noticed all of the fruit-bearing plants were starting to want to flower. It smelled and looked beautiful here, with the various trees and shrubs beginning to bloom. Almost a sweet smell to the air. One of the things that happened after the collapse was that all of the useless bushes got systemically torn out and burned. Care, of course, was given to the critters to make sure they had homes to go to. Not like before, where entire areas were clear-cut for subdivisions that were cheaply built only to be purchased by landlords instead of homeowners. What a stupid situation that had been. We didn't want to repeat the old style of clearing, so as useless shrubs were removed, we immediately replaced them with fruit-producing bushes. We scavenged every single last bush and tree we could find lingering in the abandoned plant nurseries and big box stores that nobody wanted, were too expensive, or were too scrawny. Any plant nursery store owners that we discovered that were holding out with nowhere to go, we offered them and their families relocation to a protected farm of their choice. They all considered it more than a fair trade. By that point, all of the other side's sympathizers had gone to the perceived protection of the city-state, if they believed that their side was safer anyway, so it worked out pretty well for us scooping up good folks that were just scared and didn't know where to go. We got to save thousands of producing bushes and many hard-working store owners this way. The shop owners were very happy that their stock was both being properly preserved and finally going to an appreciative use. They got to take their most important belongings with them, whatever they could carry, but did have to leave their gardening supplies behind. Where they were going, there was going to be plenty more good plants and supplies. They would have a choice of basically whatever they wanted there in terms of gardening. The gardeners would get special gardening status. That was one of the highest levels and honors we had. We gave this out due to the sacrifice they made, but also since they had so much experience with year-round gardening. All of the feedback we received from the gardeners was really good, and it was also nice to see all of these fruit bushes doing well. People just had to tend to them now to make sure nothing happened to them. If they did need something special that we didn't have local to them, we could trade hub it over to them. That meant someone could drop it off at a trade hub and have someone else pick it up and bring it to the next trade hub and so on. The process would repeat, sort of like the mail, until it got to them. This is how we moved bigger items, so if the gardener had special requirements, they could request it over the radio. We could find it and trade hub it to them. It took a little while, but we could do it. One of the biggest concerns with these new fruit-bearing plants would be to make sure animals just didn't flat out eat the bushes down to the root before they had a chance to get going. The biggest culprit of this would be the deer, who loved to munch on bushes as they tried to grow. It was a simple matter to handle the deer, though, as people were hungry anyway, so there weren't exactly deer around. The birds were going to be obnoxious and eat whatever they wanted anyway. Once the fruit started growing, though, hopefully they could stick to worms or something. We tried to intersperse trees and shrubs with berries that heavily multiplied like strawberries, which went crazy in the Pacific Northwest. So, whenever we could rescue even tiny starter strawberry plants, even the tiniest ones, we would grab them. We'd stick pots down if the runners were going somewhere they couldn't actually grow, and that's how we saved them. Then shared them back out pot by pot so everyone could grow vast strawberry fields. In one season, we knew these would quintuple, and within a few years there would be an entire strawberry field at each one of those spots, whether anyone wanted one there or not. We hoped this would offset grazing animals nibbling the bushes and trees to death before they could get going. We hoped hunting would keep the grazers away naturally for a little while. We also hoped that cherries would keep the birds busy enough to not just wholesale destroy everything also. The wild cat population had started to naturally come back, which would hopefully keep some of the birds a little more cautious like how they used to be. In time, the coyotes and wolves would come back and keep the cats shooed away most of the time. The coyotes and wolves would keep the deer naturally shooed away, and then the ecosystem would be back to normal. So anyway, within a few months, all of the trash bushes had been replaced with legitimately productive fruit-bearing bushes. This area was no exception, and in between each tree was a fruit-producing bush, and on the ground floor would be creeping varieties of strawberry plants getting started. As I tried to keep up my pace with where I guessed the teams would be, I started to notice an upsetting trend, though. As I got down the path next to the river that I would have to follow, these bright green bushes started to spring up. I couldn't see where the strawberries were at all, and this new plant was overtaking the fruit trees. I got close to one and got my phone out. My phone had never died on me. It was a model where two companies had temporarily cooperated and made an amazing collaboration. I had probably had this phone 6 or 7 years now, where most people's phones barely lasted 8 or 9 months. People used to tease me all the time, "Oh, what model is that?" And I would tell them the exact model number, proudly having recently purchased it through careful research and patience. They would repeat the number sarcastically back to me, and they would all laugh and mock me. Within a few months, though, each of them always had a phone failing, and there I was using this same phone the same day as if I'd got it out of the box. The phone's quality became notorious, and I found out his name later got repurposed to mean a fictional material that was unbreakable. Pretty funny. They kept telling me it was going to die, but it never did. I loved my phone. Anyway, I held my phone up to the top half of a leaf of this huge stocky plant about 2 inches away from it, and it was out of focus, but there was a trick. I held down on the screen of the camera and made a point with the tip of my finger as carefully as I could. My camera refocused and pulled back as far as it could through a super high resolution picture, and took a super high resolution picture of the top half of the leaf, so I would have a record to ask around back at camp. Well, it looked innocent enough, I thought to myself. I thought back to my Boy Scout days of all the uncomfortable plants that were out in the wild and figured I would try to get a picture underneath also. Didn't look anything like Devil's Club. What was it? I didn't have any tongs or see any sticks around. This trail looked very neatly kept except for these oversized nettles. I didn't really want to risk cutting off a part of the plant and have it touch me in any way. They couldn't move, but they had leaves that caught the wind and at moments could seem to snap out at you. I also didn't have the right kind of gloves to protect me from these if they had some kind of toxic oils. Taking all this into consideration, I decided to do the same camera trick, only upside down. It took me about 3 tries, since I couldn't see what I was doing and was trying to be super careful to not get touched by the plants in the light breeze. Eventually, about 30 anxious seconds worth of trying, I got a picture to come out as ultra focused of the bottom half as I did the top. I didn't know what to make of these images. On the bottom of the leaves, it definitely looked like hooks on the bottom of the leaves with a glint or sheen on them. Good thing I didn't touch them. I couldn't imagine what kind of reaction I may have had. I was still thinking about what if I had to try to remove some of the bushes, though. I did have my big folder, a border guard knife, with me in my backpack. In a side pocket I could always get to easily. It had a Tonto-style blade that I loved, and I had specially customized to just the way I liked it. It had the awful belt clip removed that seemed to have been installed almost as an afterthought. I'd been watching a Border Patrol show pre-collapse and had been so delighted to see that Border Patrol actually used these knives. It made me feel super cool. I had replaced where the belt clip was with a different size screws that fit the holes left behind flush. I also had some paracord fit through next to where the glass breaker was, where I could put my wrist through for extra support. The paracord could also help turn it into an improvised spearhead someday for fishing if I needed to lash my knife onto a pole. I always made sure my everyday carry tools had a million purposes, and this knife was no exception. It had been my car tool and city safety friend before the collapse, as I was able to take it where carrying a sidearm was the worst imaginable crime. I held it an hour or longer each direction on my daily commutes, as it could do a lot of fun things to keep me amused. Most of all was aggressive gripping on one side that I loved to rub my fingers over. It was also just plain fun to pop the blade out, as it always just presented itself with the happiest pop, like it was happy to come see what there was to do. Though I did have to be careful because I was cleaning the blade once and oil got in a retention area a little bit, so sometimes the blade would come out a tiny bit by itself. So how I carried the knife and played with it had to be a little bit more cautious than otherwise. It eventually dried back out though. Among everything else the knife could do, it also had a seatbelt cutter, which I mentally repurposed now into a safe clothes cutter if I needed to do first aid. As for the blade, it had a serrated piece I could almost saw with. It had a sharp edge beyond that and a robust tip and a slightly offset and shallow V shape. So with my knife, I could have cut down some of these new plants if I wanted to or had to. It had the reach I wanted, but I just didn't want to risk it after seeing those large hooked portions of leaf underneath. The plants glistened with something that didn't look ordinary for a plant. It looked unusual for a plant to look oily and glossy. Did nettles always look that way? My brain couldn't make up its mind either way. I thought more and came to the conclusion in the brief moments all this went through my head that if the oil from the plant got on my knife, I would have to get it off somehow. Would I wipe it off on my clothes? Then the next thing it would do is seep through my clothes and touch me. This stuff is toxic, which I had the really bad feeling it was, if this was toxic. I could see this would be a huge problem. I just hoped it wasn't too toxic. Hopefully the animals are just sleeping and the people at the plaza just have a cold or something. I pushed the thoughts out of my head as there was nothing left I could do or think about and moved forward. Chapter 10. At the river. I reached the river now and could hear the waves gently wishing against the stone break along the side. As I moved forward into the second leg of my journey towards my destination on the paved route, I took further notice of the invasive plant everywhere. I could only describe it as some kind of new version of oversized nettles I had never seen before, and it is overtaking all of the fruit bushes. By the time in the season it would be to pick the fruits here, there would be no way based on these nettles' growth speeds. It is almost growing up around the trees in a way to where you couldn't even get near the tree for that fruit either. I looked down towards the sand at the beach near the river, and no nettles were down there. I guess the nettles didn't like sand. I could see why. Sand gets into everything, and it's harsh on most plants. These nettles only wanted to be right where the fruit bushes and trees were. How frustratingly convenient. I moved down the path further and noticed some of the nettles had been hacked down and removed. It looked like there had been a concerted removal effort in this spot maybe a week or so ago. The large plants were very thick at the stalk, but I imagine were easy to slice through but dangerous to fell. The stumps had already crusted over, and there wasn't much to notice at them besides how thick they were, whereas nettles, as I remember them, used to be very thin and almost fragile, like a fern. There were already new sprouts up about a foot high all around the site. The new sprouts were growing really fast, almost like bracken fiddleheads popping up around 8 inches high already. Wondering if that was already enough for them to be dangerous, I took a picture as a record and kept walking. I didn't pay much attention to the beach. There didn't seem to be anything odd washed up. There was some lizards beginning to sunbathe on the rocks, but besides that, no wildlife. I could still hear birds singing, their morning musical though. They were telling their family history, I guess, or whatever it is birds talk about day to day over bird Wi-Fi. Normally kids would be playing here, or young couples walking the beach. Maybe it was too cold or too early. It wasn't that cold or early. Shouldn't a team be digging for mussels or some salty guy trying to fish? I looked at the dock and all the rowboats and kayaks were tied up still. As I got closer to the final bend that would put me headed towards the plaza, I noticed another attempted effort at nettle removal. This one was a lot more recent. These nettles were also very stocky and were still oozing oils and were partially through a coagulation process. I took a picture with my phone's camera for my records and noticed there was a strong minty aroma in the air. It reminded me of tea almost, reminding me to take a drink of water. I got a water bottle out of my bag and downed nearly all of it, realizing I hadn't had any water in a while. I saw there were already little sprouts coming out of the ground for new nettles, and they were maybe an inch or two high. Did this possibly happen yesterday? My eyes started to get irritated a little bit that I hadn't noticed at first. I realized I should keep moving. As I walked away, I splashed some of the water in a wash rag I kept with me, then washed around my eyes, maybe thinking it was sweat. It wasn't, though, and as I wiped my face off, I felt better and the minty aroma went away. I put the now empty water bottle in my backpack, and that's when I heard gunfire erupt a mile or two away. I stopped to think about where it was relative to my location and realized there was nothing I could do. The sound echoed a bit, distorting how much was actually going on and from where. I waited a moment, but nothing came over the radio. There was no way I could get to those shots being fired. The shots weren't going to come anywhere near me, just from past experience and gun ranges and a few gun battles I'd been in over the last 6 months. I checked my watch, and I was slightly behind schedule, though, and decided I would pick up the pace to make sure I met my deadline for radio check-in. Hopefully the guys were okay. Chapter 11, Up the Beach. I rounded the corner once I got to the point where the concrete pathway met the beach. I was counting gunfire and pauses for assumed mag changes, and it sounded like our team had ran into some other group. I assume it was related to the vehicles we had heard earlier. I imagined everyone on our team being fine, as I could hear everyone's ARs firing, as I had so many times in training, and then the AKs slightly less often. Then I would hear a 308 a little less often than that, which, even though I know they were all wearing special hearing inserts, was really not fun to be close to. Even less fun to be on the receiving end of, though, as the special rounds he was firing went through cars and everything else that got in the way. He would only be firing if he actually saw something or knew where they were, since he could shoot through everything to get to them. Looking around where I was, there was nobody around still. I definitely imagined people should be there at this, as this was the closest part of the beach to the Allied building. Had they retreated for security due to the gunfire, or was it something else? There was only one way I was going to find out, so I kept going and kept listening. It sounded like our team was working on a surround maneuver. They were up against several handguns and maybe 2 rifles at best, based on what I was hearing. So a lot of the gunfire sounded scary to someone not used to training and tactics, but almost all of it was simply theatrics, as my team vied for position. As I walked, I tried to make sure I would be on time with how long I estimated their gun battle would last. So I thought about the whole situation a little more. People used to complain about carrying a lot of magazines, as if carrying 6 magazines was too many for self-defense. "Oh, you're carrying enough ammo to be a mass shooter," they would complain about pre-collapse. They were also hyperbolic. The term mass shooting had completely lost all of its original definition anyway, similarly to most other words completely overused. Words like literally and racist had been so diluted they were used now for almost everything. So simply carrying an extra mag for your self-defense pistol was way overboard for their consideration. Having 2 spare mags to them meant you were a full-blown psychopath, hell-bent on wiping out an entire crowd. This, of course, wasn't true, but they thought it was. But for rifles, 6 spare mags was the minimum acceptable. In reality, more like 8 magazines was about average for self-defense loadout. Each person was carrying between 6 and 8 for their rifle, another set for their sidearm. Each mag for their rifle carried 30 rounds on a standard mag. That's about 180 rounds. So when people flip their noodles about someone having 10,000 rounds of ammo in their house, that's only 55 sets of ammo roughly. That isn't even training twice a month per year, and that's only for 1 rifle. Reality is people don't think. As I imagine our team in mid-process of a surround, I kept watching, and another thought came to mind. It was about another misconception I used to always hear. People would constantly say to me, "You only ever need 6 bullets. If you need more, you're a bad shot and shouldn't have a gun." I used to tell them all the things wrong with this. First of all, whoever goes into a life or death struggle wanting the bare minimum force without a modern firearm, why would you do that when you don't even know what you're going up against? What kind of mentality is that? They, of course, never have an answer and just repeat themselves, usually because the rifle was designed for war or whatever. Well, so were M1s, but everyone had one of those, and Beretta M92s and 1911s and Colt single-action armies. And everyone had those at one point or the other. It's a stupid argument. Then I say, where did this notion of there was only ever being one attacker come into the scenario? I always noticed for their stupid arguments there was magically only ever one attacker in this theoretical home invasion. I told them, you can choose your favorite news channel. They can literally choose whichever one they want. You go look at all the home invasions and they'll see how many people are breaking in. Go look at ambushes at the drive-thru with the local fast food restaurant. How many attackers? Typically they go for overwhelming odds, obviously. It isn't one person anymore, it's 3. They have an organized plan and the trend is heading towards closer to 5. Plus, what if it's a woman? Some gal maybe with a kid in the car is supposed to fight off 5 adult males while boxed in a drive-thru? Stupid. As at this point the conversation is over and they don't want to talk anymore. They will refuse to look up this information and will say it isn't real. I know they don't want it to be real, but unfortunately it is. Sometimes these people try to say to simply fight them off, but there are cases of kids shooting home invaders. I've heard people try to say it's a masculine thing, but women defend themselves with guns too. I've also heard them try to say that people, especially women, wouldn't be able to defend themselves with firearms, but then they would be trying to take the elderly and vets' guns away next, saying they shouldn't be allowed to defend themselves for whatever stupid reason. The ironic thing was, the people complaining the loudest about all of this and projecting the most insecurity ended up inevitably becoming what they hated. After trying to limit and take guns away for years, just before the collapse, they tried to buy them all up and ended up creating one last big gun grab. All of a sudden, it was okay to basically own whatever you wanted, just because they decided it was okay. And with that final thought, there was an unsettling lull in the shooting for a few seconds, and as quickly as the shooting had stopped, 5 nearly simultaneous shots took place, ending the gun battle I'd been listening to as I was walking to my destination. Such is life on the freeways these days. I said a prayer to myself for my buddies and kept walking. I could now see the plaza in the distance. While trudging up through the sand, I looked to my left and right in the brush and saw that the nettles had taken over everything there as well. There had been attempts to cut them down, as I could see, multiple revisions and histories of thick nettle stumps only to be replaced with new ones. It looked like someone was maybe doing some experiments after having given up some spots, then trying in others. It had looked like maybe they had actually tried to keep this plant beaten back and then started maybe doing tests on it or with it. I took a couple of pictures with my camera's phone and kept heading towards the building, with the structure clearly in view now. Chapter 12, Arriving at the Plaza. I looked down at my watch, and it was right at about a half an hour since I'd split off from the team. I looked around for the alcove that was the entrance to the basement, and went to go stand next to it. I also decided to double-check my radio to make sure it was still on and at volume and power, just for something to do. Sometimes it was possible to bump, so you never know. It was still at full power, just like it was supposed to be. I turned the dial down until the knob had resistance, where another twist would shut it off. Then I twisted it a half a twist or so to where I usually like the volume to start out at. I figured I would give them another minute, since they did moments before have a gun battle and all, so I looked around some more. In front of me was the entrance to the alcove. There was a huge vehicle entrance and exit going in with steel shutters that were down, locked, and chained. I wouldn't be going through there. Next to the 2 steel shuttered entrances was a steel door with a card reader slot and pin pad with a red light, green light next to it. The red light was currently illuminated. There were steel-reinforced concrete retractable bollards all around the entrance that were at full extension right now, defending the entrances from anyone trying to ram through. These bollards were rated to stop anything up to and including a semi-truck, but could be lowered for authorized vehicles during normal business hours. This building had been on lockdown mode almost exclusively since the collapse, and the bollards only went down to let in our vehicles, when it came time to visit. They weren't coming down now, and the steel shutters weren't up to let us in. As I waited for my team's radio signal, the telltale overcast weather that had blown in unnoticed became a drizzle. I looked around as all of the plants and structure got their bi-hourly bath and breathed in the refreshing clean air. The incoming communication didn't take much longer. "Analyst, do you copy?" It was our comms guy. I adjusted the volume slightly. Analyst was my code name, which they all called me for obvious reasons. I pressed the button on my radio to speak. "I copy. You guys all okay?" "We're fine, just some car trouble," they responded. I pressed my talk button and responded, "Copy that. I'm at the entry point, waiting final approval, over." Who knows, maybe they heard something. Maybe everything was fine. Maybe this was all just a mistake. There was a brief pause, then our outreach officer spoke over the radio. "Try the card and PIN, verify you can get in." I got the card out of my back pocket and held it against the card reader pad. It took 3 or 4 seconds for me to find the sweet spot, but I saw the red light flicker between red and green. Then I put in the PIN. The light stopped blinking and stayed on green, and I heard a heavy chunk as the bolt slammed back into the door. Knowing I only had a few seconds, I turned the handle open in the door and held it open with my foot. Hopefully an alarm wouldn't go off if I left this door open too long, but I suspected one would. Even if it was a local buzzer, not worth risking. I put the card in my back pocket and shouldered my AR. With my trigger finger pointed forward and my left finger on a temporary on-off flashlight switch adjacent to my foregrip, I activated my flashlight to see inside as all of the lights were off, heading down into the basement. I took my left hand off the flashlight and foregrip for a second, which made the light shut off, and I pressed my radio's talk button and spoke. "Badge pin work, door open, copy." Our outreach officer responded, "Enter immediately, let the door close behind you. Talk to you in 1 hour, Delta side, copy." "Copy, entering, talk in 1 hour. Delta side out." I put my left hand back on the foregrip and pressed my flashlight temporarily back on, and I went inside and let the door shut behind me quickly, but quietly. Delta side was the west side of the building in this instance. I'd entered in Charlie side. Alpha side was the main entrance, which faced north. Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta, clockwise from the main entrance. I thought about it for a second to make sure and nodded silently to myself. I swept the area, checking the corners to the left and right and down the ramp. It being clear, I moved around to find a spot of relative cover where I could listen for a second, so I took a knee to try to make my footprint smaller. I put my hand back up on my foregrip and was bumping my flashlight's switch, then sweeping to scan around the area, even though it was dead quiet in here with no movement. Hearing nothing, I stood back up to full height and shuffled with my back to the wall to the left corner of this new area, feeling suddenly alone. Then pointed my AR and thus my flashlight to try to see all the angles I could down into the plaza's parking garage, then clicked my flashlight on, and thankfully nothing stood out as a concern. I shuffled to the other corner of the inside of the entrance and did the same thing again. Both sweeps of the area revealed nothing of concern, thankfully, so carefully down I went. Chapter 3, Into the Darkness. My strategy going into the basement parking garage was sort of a mixed jumble in my head. It didn't surprise me too much that the lights were off in here. They must only turn them on when they're expecting visitors, as lighting this vast area would consume a massive amount of power. I guess then that it also made sense that nobody would be down here if the situation has deteriorated. Either everyone was sick, or the place had been taken over, or both. Car trouble, which the team had mentioned, was secret code for the convoy being attacked. They must have been about to their spot, and the enemy force had been ending up camped out there. Knowing it was the last best possible strategic spot, the enemy must have tried to ambush my guys from it. Thankfully, we've trained for that stuff, but it is still very frustrating. One thing after another, as they say. I remember to dig a water bottle out at this point, lost in thought as I began this leg of my adventure. I let my AR hang back down, then I flipped my bag around while still keeping it on by just taking one arm off and swinging it around. I had to do this a little more carefully since my AR was slung in front of me, but it was doable. This way I could feel what was inside my backpack and didn't have to put my head down. I reached inside to get a water bottle where I thought it would be, but my hand hit something else. It felt like a plastic zip bag, but I didn't remember packing a plastic zip bag in there, and I pulled it out. It was some homemade beef jerky from a member who liked to smoke her own proteins that the hunters brought back. What a treat to get these. She must have tossed them in my bag whenever one was tossing me snacks to do this mission alone. I grabbed my water bottle and put the zip bag out and put it in my pocket so I could get to it easier. Right afterward, I pulled out a strip from the bag and ate it at the same time so it could partially reconstitute. It was chewy and not tough in taste, barbecued and delicious. I flipped my backpack back around so it was on my back, and then I took another drink from my water bottle and put that in another pocket. Having food and water at the ready, I shouldered my AR again and began walking around the edge of the garage to minimize blind spots. I made my way past all of the neatly parked cars. I checked in the cars, through the windows, under the cars, and in between each row of cars, looking for signs of ambush, but nobody was down here. I relaxed a little, but not very much. Usually when you relaxed was when something horrible would happen. I looked at the cars more to think if maybe there was anything out of the ordinary. I remembered from before that the vehicles had been drained of all their fluids months ago for long-term storage. The other reason was to fuel other more important vehicles, but it was just amazing to see all the cars and trucks lined up. It was like a museum in here. All of the cars looked normal, and like none of them had been touched in several months. This is how they were supposed to look. As I walked past the cars towards the stairs and elevators, I kept sweeping my AR and thus my flashlight from side to side. My finger always pointed forward and always on safe, where I could flick it off and fire immediately if I needed, and as I had trained so many times before. I would hold the flashlight in to see, sweep, and let go so it would shut off so I could move in the darkness. The strategy seemed to usually work really well. This flashlight also could easily throw a reasonably wide beam, 50 yards or so, which means I could see far down in the parking garage, but not to the end. This parking garage was easily a football field in length, and with columns and other structure portions in the way. There weren't many portable lights that were designed for that didn't get super hot with a reasonable battery life. There was one thing that all flashlights did well, though. On a few of my sweeps, there were refracting eyes looking back at me from further in the garage. I remember that the plaza had cats for a few reasons. One of them was to keep mice and rats from destroying the cars. It's good to see that the cats were okay. They must have shut them in here to make sure they were safe from those nettles outside. I reminded myself to try to remind myself to make sure they had food and stuff, to make sure people hadn't forgotten about them if they were sick or worse. Then I moved towards the doors to the stairs. I took a look at the stairwell door to figure out how to proceed. Stairwell doors were always backwards, or inside out as I called them, so they actually opened into the stairwell instead of out. This is part of how buildings are pressurized. It's the same for every door, except for doors facing outside, where it isn't security practical. To enter properly in this type of doorway, I would stand up at the door, turn the knob, and move in with it. I let my AR hang down and tried the door, but it wouldn't open. It wasn't locked, though. It seemed more like it was jammed shut. I tried to open it with force, but carefully without slamming, and it was solidly wedged closed. Something must be on the other side of this door holding it closed. Nothing is getting this door open from this side. I stepped back and looked at the elevator for a second just to make sure and verify that no power was going to it. I know in the movies they go into elevators and get into the access hatches and climb through them to find access ladders and elevator shafts, but without a ladder there was no way I had a chance with that, and I think those ladders are fictional anyway. From having a tour before, I knew this place had a sub-basement level. My new plan was to go down one more floor and try from there. What were the chances they did whatever they did to this door to the next door down also? That would take a lot of effort. Realizing I was going to be spending more time in the basement levels than I wanted, I went to put my phone in airplane mode. I paused for a moment, then laughed to myself, realizing my phone was always in airplane mode now. We haven't used cell service in like half a year. The thought cracked me up. I shined my flashlight on my watch for a second to charge the glow. Based off the glowing readout, I had about 45 minutes until radio check-in. With that thought, I took a drink of water, shoved some more jerky in my mouth, shouldered my AR, and began sweeping for threats on my way to sub-basement, level 2. There were a lot of vehicles on basement level 1. It had a high ceiling, so it was mostly practical vehicles, with there being some wide four-wheel drive vehicles, both civilian and military, and some various brands of semi-tractors. As I was doing my best to look between and around them, I spotted some deuce and a halves, and next to that was a Unimog. I think that was from back when we were building them here, or imported a couple. That was really cool. Next to the Unimog, I saw a couple of JLTVs, Joint Light Tactical Vehicles. They were the replacements for, there they were, as I walked further, continuing to sweep for threats, and spotted the old Cougar MRAPs, mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles. They were still really good, but eventually a few methods were found that could defeat them, and an updated design was prompted. It was a strange feeling to me, being a civilian, actually being so close to the armor, which was highly proprietary. I used to work on the processes and procedures for military trucks going overseas, and the armor was the most coveted piece of the truck because that's what saved the soldier's life, besides the truck obviously running perfectly to spec. In production, we had to make sure that the armor never fell into the wrong hands, and so many years later, this was still no exception. I was taking this responsibility very seriously. Some memories floated up from when we got the basement tour here originally. I remember the proprietor saying that they didn't really have a lot of this stuff to eventually utilize it, but more so to keep it away from everybody else who would use these vehicles against us all. A lot of the military equipment got equally divided up when it dissolved after the collapse to give no side a massive advantage. This just happened to be one of the secured repositories where a portion of the ordnance ended up. The fact that this is all here is actually a largely guarded secret. Largely a guarded secret. Yeah. People know cars are here, but not really the military vehicles. These vehicles are also kept out of everyone's hands through a combination of us visiting to maintain an external security presence, as place is supposed to be fairly protected, and a preventative measure that the vehicles are always unfueled. Tanker trucks can't get in here due to 18-wheelers being too long. That meant it would take an estimated hour or so to break the defenses and fuel the vehicles. That is the best estimation anyone had been able to forecast or anticipate. By the time people got in and started fueling any smaller way, we would be able to get there and neutralize any threat. We would also be met here with about 3 other groups that are nearby that we could call ahead of time. Sort of like a mutual defense policy. Basically, we could rain down absolute death on whoever tried to take this place, which was part of the agreement. Chapter 14, Deeper Down. I began following the wall towards some basement level 2 with a right-handed search and checking between the cars below and in them through the windows as best I could. Then I would release my finger from the flashlight's button, move a little, and then repeat the process at the next row of cars. I was having a hard time making my mind up if this was a plan from the bad guys all along to get me further down into an ambush. Maybe it was just a coincidence, because I knew they couldn't or didn't know how to lock the outside of that door, so they locked the inside one. Either way, I kept making my way down along the wall from row of cars to row of cars, light on and light off, trying to do my best to clear as I go and not make myself an easy target. Finally, at around 100 yards, I got to a bend, which was the part I was the most concerned about down here. The part where anything could happen. Maybe there would be a bunch of evil clowns in tiny clown cars, all honking their noses in car horns. Maybe it would be zombies or vampires or zompires. Who knows? And there was only one way to find out. I needed to turn this corner. In the movies, they always made it look really easy. You just either poke your head around the corner or you waggle a hat to see if it gets shot at. Maybe you use a mirror to see. A lot of times, they would just jump full frame into the new area, which would get you so beyond dead in real life if someone was waiting for you. Most people call that the fatal funnel. If I had a drone or something, I could send it down there, but we didn't have any drones. Maybe someday. This was a parking garage, though. These corners were really thick and rounded to support so much weight above them and to take potential impacts and survive. If they were edged, I could have just used my camera on my phone to look, but even then, it was pitch black down here. My camera, even with its light, wouldn't have been able to see far, and I wouldn't want to get shot. That would be horrible, too. I could have also poked my head out for a split second, flicked my flashlight, and came back and switched levels if I needed to check again, but again, it was a rounded corner. There was no edge where I could cleanly peek around to clearly see in a direct line to threat assess. Also, bullets traveled along walls. Even if someone missed me and shot short, I wondered if the bullets would travel up the wall and hit me. The walls were a little older, though, and a little crumbly. I thought it would more likely that if they missed, they would just spray concrete in my face, which didn't seem any better. I couldn't think of a safe way of clearing the near corner that would provide me a safe cover. So, instead of poking my head around at the corner, I stood and waited with my back to the wall. I was right at the point before turning the corner, thinking to myself, as I used to before the collapse, right before actions such as opening the shower curtains or opening a door when I could hear nothing on the other side, but felt like something was going to pop out at me. I fear no evil, I said to myself in my head. Then I thought again and realized I don't have to turn this blind corner into what could be a horrible hail of gunfire. I went to the opposing side of the basement to where the corner would still be a blind spot for what could potentially be on the other side. This way I could cut the pizza, as they liked to call it in room clearing. The corner looped down and around to the right, so I went to the left side of the parking garage as quietly as I could. Then I shouldered my AR on my left shoulder instead of my right, and hand my left hand around the grip with the finger pointed above the trigger and right hand on the foregrip. This was technically my weak side, but allowed me to still be presenting as little of myself as possible for the appropriate side I was going to be advancing on. I hadn't practiced this as much, but I would do my best. This different stance allowed me to clear right angles without presenting my left arm before my rifle, which kept me a lot safer. Using the corner far in front of me as forward cover, I shuffled to the left with my back almost, but not quite, to the wall behind me and prepared to flick my light on. This way I could dart back if I needed to with ample space instead of having to cover right in front of my face. Having the cover right in front of my face. That would have given the potential threat in front of me more vision than I had. Wouldn't be good. Also, if they were expecting me to pop out at the forward depth, I would be at this further depth, potentially giving me an advantage. Lastly, being as far back as I was gave me an additional height and leverage advantage, and so I had height as a cover also. If someone was down there, they couldn't fire up at me from this angle. This approach allowed me to come from a down angle instead of a side angle. If they missed, the bullets would go above me and I could just easily back up. They would have to come to me instead of me being stuck at the corner. I could hop down into the prone. Well, I thought about it for a second and decided to just crawl to the edge and look down to the sub-basement that way. I figured if they had night vision, I would have been dead already at being at such a disadvantage, so we must be on equal ground. Only if I had grenades or smoke or something. Nothing like that, though. I crawled as quietly as I could on the cold concrete floor to where basement level 1 starts its descent into basement level 2. I stopped just short of the decline, planning on using that as my cover, and took my backpack off as sort of an improvised sandbag in front of me. If I did start taking fire, I could shield my face with it as it has a soft armor piece in it. I would be able to safely back up to where the shots would start going high, and then I could switch positions and figure out my options. I had my backpack in front of me like an improvised shield and got ready to hit my light and figure out what was going on in sub-basement level 2. Regardless of my strategy and caution, though, when I flicked my light on, the only thing staring back at me was some reflecting eyes and more sub-basement. The eyes disappeared and reappeared a few times, which meant blinking, and I did my best to not focus my beam and the AR at them. Did it also mean they were already getting bored of me? What's with cats anyway? I swept the area a few times, then inched forward and got on my knees to get a better line of sight and tried to see as far back as I could go, and it was nothing but cars. It hurt my knees a little this time. I really needed knee pads. I had internal ones, but they were never in the right spot. I got my backpack on and stood up and went and got to, but not quite touched the left wall. This whole time still keeping my AR shouldered on my left arm until I cleared this right angle and proceeded to clear the last couple of nooks. I knew from experience in parking garages there was going to be another right angle at the bottom of this ramp. It was a sharp angle though, and I was able to quickly peek around and tap my light once to see. I checked that area next and there was nothing, only an empty corner. There was a supply closet there too, tucked under where the ramp is, and it was securely locked. With that, I did another sweep and saw nothing but cars, so I switched my AR back to my strong side and kept going. Where the first floor was more practical vehicles, I think mostly due to that floor having more ceiling space, this floor had some more of the exotic cars. I was still doing well on time according to my watch, and took a second to swoon at the 99 silver Dodge Viper that lived down there. I knew absolute squat about cars, but that one was always my favorite. It had been armored by someone that liked 90s TV shows. It had been raised about 4 inches so it could handle our roads here better. It also had a drone that could launch, run flat tires, and it was just all around badass. It was literally my dream car. He even had the drone I needed. Bah! I think someone that was affiliated with this place had the foresight to collect locations of rare cars that he had been keeping his eyes on, so when everyone split during the collapse, he got all the rare cars he could hear for preservation. It seems silly, but everyone had their own idea of what was important. These cars were very American, so in a way it really made sense. There was a whole area here of cars from TV shows, a time travel car with flip-up doors, an 80s black Trans Am that was famous for talking, and a yellow bug car that could fictionally turn into a robot. Past those was several black cars side by side, starting with a black military-looking one, then a curved, long-looking one with a turbine in the front and wings in the back. Lastly was a beautifully modified Lincoln Futura with smart red piping and fins in the back. There were even more I found interesting, but as I went from car to car, I tried to remind myself I was searching for threats. I wasn't there to gawk at cars. I didn't understand very well. As I went from car to car, I eventually got near the end of sub-basement level 2. That meant I was at the next elevator and door. If I was unable to get through this door, I wasn't sure what I would do. I swept the area one more time and didn't see anything. Enough procrastination. It was time to try the door. It was a brushed steel knob. I looked down at it as if trying to will it to be okay. Also, I thought back and realized in the future it would be super helpful to bring a crowbar with me. I wonder if this door was trapped, maybe with some C4 plastic explosives or maybe a claymore. I think I recall them having some claymores here. I remember us being down here before, so it isn't like they would leave this door randomly claymored, would they? I wouldn't think so. Nobody would try to enter from down here because this would be a stupid place to enter from. So stupid, it might work. There were a lot easier places to enter if you were trying brute force. I was really procrastinating on this door. I looked down and some of the cats had gathered at my feet. Maybe this was a sign that they trusted me and the door. If it was bad, maybe they wouldn't want near it, I mused. The doorknob was on the right side of the door, and the door opened inward. I switched rifle positions again, from having it shouldered on my right to my left, and switched hand positions. I then took my right hand off my AR's foregrip and went to grab the steel doorknob. In anticipation of something, some of the cats got up against the door at this point, and some got on their hind legs. There were maybe 4 or 5 cats now, and they started mewing and clawing at the door. I thought for a second as to how best to open this door and begin to clear hallways, and decided I wanted to shorten my AR a bit. Due to this special SWAT-style AR being a direct piston impingement system instead of gas, and thus not having a buffer tube, I could actually have a folding stock on it instead of it being collapsible. I found the release to fold the stock using my memory and pressed it in, quietly folding the stock, then hearing it snap a second time when it became completely folded in place. Anticipation was almost too much for the cats at this point, and I put my shoulder to the door and my AR to my shoulder. With my free hand, I twisted the doorknob and opened it so slightly so only my rifle and flashlight were poking through. I brought my free hand back, and the cats helped me open the door from there, all pushing the door open at the same time and rushing in like a furry torrent. I entered the new area with the cats, sweeping for threats, but there were none. With all the cats inside, the door shut solidly behind us. Chapter 15, Stairwell. Some of the cats all ran up the stairs, and some stayed behind as I scanned the surroundings a second time. It was a mostly empty airwell with heavy-duty dolly for moving heavy equipment. There was also some oversized plastic tubs on the floor with some ground-up cedar chips. Those must be the cats' litter boxes. The dolly placed here likely in case people wanted to move heavy objects around nearby. I maneuvered to traverse up one floor to see what the issue with the door was. I went up a couple stairs and pointed up with my rifle to see the ceiling. No threats and nothing off the stairs. I went the rest of that set of stairs backwards, and no threats the level above me. There was a steel filing cabinet wedged between the door and the stairwell, though. Nothing on earth could have moved from the outside. It had also somehow fallen in a way to where it wedged the door into the facility shut as well. I figured out what happened now. Someone did this situation with the steel cabinet, got stuck, and then had to go through the sub-basement. They were probably in a hurry or being barked at. They exited through the garage, got locked out entirely, and then gave up securing the sub-basement since they couldn't get back in. So they couldn't get into the garage at all until they worked the security cards out of the security team here. Who knows how long the security team could hold up. Hopefully they were okay. Hopefully I wasn't too late. On the door, going further into the building, light was shining through the bottom of the door faintly. I wanted to be quiet, so I didn't want to try to brute force shove this heavy cabinet and risk getting attention before I was ready. I decided to get the dolly from the floor below and carefully maneuvered around all the cats, who were now very anxious to get at what was in that cabinet. I let my AR hang down and quietly carried the dolly up to the second floor. First, I got anything heavy out of the cabinet that could shift, although it was awkward to quietly get the door open while the unit was partially sideways. I then used it as leverage to prop the cabinet up enough to where I could get under it with my fingers. Thankfully, it seemed to be maybe only 50 or 60 pounds, but huge. Using my knees, I was able to quietly rock the cabinet upright. I had to carefully also slow it down so it didn't slam its base on the floor, squish any cats, or rock back too far and slam its back against the wall. Some items resettled in there, slowly sliding back down in place as I brought the cabinet up, but overall I think I did a good job of being quiet. I used the dolly again to quietly move the cabinet back to where I thought it was supposed to be and noticed a sign. The sign said, "Please leave the door propped open for the cats." Okay, I see the problem, I thought to myself in a duh moment. I went through each drawer, having closed each before opening the next. I found some cat food dishes and some gallon water jugs. I also found their bag, cat food, and inserted a wedge for the door. And an insert wedge for the door. I quietly fed the cats, which stopped the mewing. Hopefully the cats hadn't drawn any attention, but I imagine that nobody was down here or anyone nearby had tuned out the mewing a long time ago. I couldn't do it. The little baby kitty's cries would have ripped my heart out. So, I refilled the cat's water container, which accepted the 1-gallon jugs. I heard something getting shredded and turned and flicked my flashlight on to see that the folks here prior had some makeshift cat posts. There was also a little cat-sized foot pedal that connected to a special insert in the door so the cats could engage the latching mechanism to a tiny cat door with their paw. I reinserted it into the door how I thought it was supposed to be, then I put the dolly to the side. The cats could get back out from the inside because the pressure always pushed the door in a little bit so they could get it open. Such engineering genius. With that done, it was time to find out what was going on here. Chapter 16, Quarantine Hallway. I looked around inside again. These were all internal doors, and thus I expected them to be unlocked. Hearing nothing from the other side and the cats being distracted, I paused to check what the cats were doing instead of assuming. One of the cats was circling around my leg, being appreciative from the looks of it. Then the cat stopped to smell me, downloading all the information from my cat. I stopped and patted the cat on the head. The cat sninked out a claw and tugged at my pant leg, not done smelling. I waggled my leg a bit, and it held on. After a few moments, it detached and then went on its way with its mouth half open like a goof. I took a second to look at the cats, and they all appeared to be in good health, except Hungry, and all the males were neutered. That was both to keep them smart and to keep them from pottying on everything 24/7. I recalled there was a vet or two here, so they had been taking good care of the cats up until recently. I would find out what was going on right now. I checked my watch and had about a half an hour left to check in. The cats, having finished giving me its thanks, went back to its food, water, and bathroom situation. Alright, with all the cats now back to their routine, I shouldered my AR and put my shoulder to the door. A sign on the door stating, "No cats beyond this point. Fair enough." Then, with my shoulder against the wall, I twisted the doorknob and pulled the door open slightly so I could see in. Barrel first, and only looking through my optic with one eye, the light shining through from the next room illuminated no threats. The cats, still interested in their meal, stayed behind me. I entered the hallway and helped the door quietly shut behind me. There was a narrow hallway now, so that could be thought of sort of like a quarantine zone where I surmised people could take and shoo the cats back out if they needed to. I suddenly felt vulnerable, took a knee. A knee hit the floor with a bonk. I shuffled my knee pad inserts around. They weren't great, but better than nothing. Resting on my knee a little bit more comfortable now, the brief respite gave me a second to think. This was the first quiet time and first bit of light that wasn't from my flashlight in a while. I put the last piece of beef jerky in my mouth with my offhand and then crumpled up the bag quietly, and a cat started clawing at the door, probably smelling the jerky. I tried to push the painful, shrill scraping sound out of my head. Then, to go with the jerky, I decided I wanted some water, so I quietly let my AR hang down and swung my backpack around slowly so it wouldn't rustle. I got a new water bottle out and tucked the plastic bag away so I could toss it in the garbage later. I untwisted the cap and started to drink, but did not squeeze the bottle, as water bottles were notorious for making loud, crinkly noises. Right then, I heard some voices and froze in the silence. Backpack still obstructing my AR, I quickly screwed the cap on my bottle and set it down to free my hands, but didn't know what to do. Either everything slowed down or I started to think really fast as the footsteps and voices got closer. I could throw the backpack off and simply prepare for a fight right then, but that seemed silly. There were no audible alarms going off, and I didn't know if I could make it to the doorway in time. I could retreat and fall back, but there was really nowhere to go, and I didn't like anywhere prior I had been defensively wise anyway. I also didn't know who these people were. Maybe they were just innocent people walking by. Or maybe they were sick, but I didn't hear coughing. I needed to be able to defend myself, though, and so I decided to stay completely still, and if they decided to come through, I would lift my backpack up in front of me with my left hand as a shield. That would act as clearing at sorts for my 320 sidearm, which had ample capacity if they were hostile. At that point, I could throw my backpack around me again and go back to close quarters with my AR, depending on whatever situation it is at that point. Patiently as ever, I sit and wait, straining my ears, angling my head, and trying to move my jaw a little to try to listen in on the conversation. My anxiety levels raised, though, as I tried to control my sensitive hearing. My natural instinct always was to try to talk myself out of a situation. Unfortunately, with the resistance, they generally either made up their mind ahead of time or had handlers that wouldn't let them talk out of fear. It would be under the guise of normalizing hate speech or whatever, even when asking them simple questions like what the protest topic of the day was, so talking was rarely an option, which was sad because there was generally always middle ground somewhere, but oh well. In this case, I wasn't able to see who was talking to see if they were good or bad. I gave them the benefit of the doubt and remained on one knee. The group quickly passed by, making references to some strange people. I couldn't really catch what they were trying to say either way. That wasn't enough for me to decide. Did they mean the intruders, or did they mean us? We weren't strange, were we? Maybe they were new. I wasn't sure. Come to think of it, I should probably review Combo Plaza's vetting processes, just to make sure when this is all over. Maybe that's how they got infiltrated. The people on the other side of the door had walked away farther than I could hear, so I quietly swung my backpack around and knocked over my water bottle. I winced out of forgetting that it was there. I waited to feel a bunch of water everywhere in the quiet, but then I remembered and thanked myself I had taken the second to put the cap on. I finished getting my backpack on comfortably, then picked up my water bottle and wiped the dust and crud off it from the floor. Sure, there wasn't any gross floor residue on my water bottle. I took a sip and put the cap back on tight and put it back in my pocket, and then I dusted myself off. In one motion, I stood up and brought up my AR. My AR was still in pistol configuration, having its stock folded, so I could bring it in close with me to open doors. I decided to leave it this way, especially now that I was in a narrow hallway. That reminded me to wonder what time it was. I checked my watch on my left wrist. It had roughly 10 minutes left before I needed to be within radio reach to hear from the team. I really was planning on accomplishing more in this amount of time, but everyone's going to take the situation differently, so hopefully the team would understand. I still needed to make contact with somebody here on the inside, though, so I had something to report. I got to the door, which swung inward to where I was once again. Then I got overcome in thought for a moment on how to proceed. I was still technically on the basement level. Controls for this level's garage door were up one level on the lobby level at the guard station. I needed to find out if the virus or whatever it was contagious still. Then I needed to get the team inside if it wasn't. And I needed to do this without compromising myself. It was time to start blending in. Instead of going full tactical, I let my AR hang down one more time and brought out two other things from my backpack everyone dreaded far worse. My Gen 2 tactical pen and write in wherever notebook. Then I folded up my rifle, making sure the safety was on, and stuffed it in my pack. I put my pen in my pocket, using the clip to make sure I could grab it, and put my notebook under my left arm. Chapter 7. Basement Offices. The solid aircraft aluminum chassis of the smartly chiseled pen helped me feel both smart and confident. The tungsten carbide pen tip of the pen helped me feel well enough defended in CQC without my sidearm close by. I patted my pen and nodded to my clipboard, and I was ready. Sure that I heard no one in the other room, I mustered as much confidence as I could and turned the doorknob. I felt the mechanism's pieces turn in my hand as each spring pulled into place and stopped as soon as I felt the latch move enough for me to open the door. I then slowly released the doorknob the other direction to let the internal springs slowly move back into place. I opened the door in a slow and deliberate motion and moved my hand to the other side of the knob, where I repeated the same turn from memory. As I moved, the door moved with me, and I stopped just before the door would close and let it slowly and quietly close behind me. When I felt the door touch the frame, I slowly let the doorknob go a final time as the springs released back to where they rested. I didn't have much time. I needed to find someone to get a situation report, then needed to get up one floor to the guard station. With my pen in my right hand and my notebook in my left, I set out to find some people to talk to. I walked past a few darkened rooms that looked like they had ultraviolet lights in them, then came to a room with what looked like a small chemistry laboratory. There were some scientist-type people in here working that had total tunnel vision. I wasn't really careful until they weren't holding anything. I was really careful until they weren't holding anything. Then politely and softly said out loud, "Knock, knock." This, of course, made them all jump. They were all saying things at the same time, but then I took 2 steps forward and began talking over them. "Listen to me," I said authoritatively. "I'm conducting a quick security assessment, and I need all of your cooperation. I will be out of your hair in just a minute, so you can get back to what you're doing. Do you all understand?" The one that was most likely the unofficial leader said, as if to correct me, "Well, do you understand that you are in a quarantined area and ignored all the signs, and you are now infected?" I responded, "Of course I understand that. I'm down here, aren't I? I still have to do my security assessment to make sure everything's okay." They thought this was really strange. I didn't remember seeing any quarantine signs, but the door had been unlocked. I tried to think back if I remembered seeing anything on the door saying not to come in. I forgot to look. Was it a yellow triangle or a circle? I can't remember any of that stuff. Or was it nuclear or biohazard? Wasn't this chemical? I can't remember. Anyway, I just had to play it cool and confident. Okay, so I just have a few questions, then I can go back upstairs. And I do apologize for interrupting. Has anyone been harassing you lately? I need to ask, you know. This got more weird facial expressions from them than the leader commenting in a musing tone to one of his coworkers. How has he not fallen over vomiting and white froth coming from every orifice yet? He spoke in a mildly curious tone, as if this was a normal thing and purely medical with no emotion. "I don't know," responded another, more curious than anything. "Great," I thought sarcastically, as almost bored to myself. Scientists have such a weird sense of humor. I continued to try to keep my momentum up. "So anyway, guys, I just need to know what the situation is, if anyone's been bothering or harassing you all when you're trying to get your work done. Has everything been okay down here?" They responded with, "Everything's been fine, but we've been stuck out down here for days now. There were a bunch of guys that tried to take over while we were trying to cure this advanced Artesa diosea toxin. We got a bunch of them infected with it on accident when they came down here and wouldn't listen to us." "Weird how nobody listens to us," another one said with a dry tone, as if they get no respect and are basically completely ignored. I had a feeling at this point if they'd been getting harassed, they didn't tell the bad guys about the virus stuff on purpose, as if to let Darwin sort it out or something. "Sorry," I replied. I tried to sound as genuine as possible, though I was more sorry for their predicament than their various laments. The leader continued, annoyed that his colleagues and I kept interrupting. "It's all right. You don't seem like one of them. That's why we weren't worried about anyone getting in anymore. We know people could technically come down here to bother us, but they would promptly become severely ill and have to get rushed right up to the hospital up on level 5. I looked at my watch, only 5 minutes left before I had to make contact. I had so many questions, but they would have to wait, so I tried to cram in as many questions as I can and completely forego the act. Trying to pretend like I was doing a security review obviously wasn't adding value. I spoke as authoritatively as possible anyway, without trying to come off as a jerk, but still urgent. Guys, you're just going to have to trust me. I need to know a few things really quick. How many guys are there? Where are they? What do they want? Can you tell me anything that will help me recover this building for you? They looked at me and saw the thoughts going through my mind. Then the leader spoke as if I was a necessary result to an equation. In helping me, though, he knew I could cause more problems, potentially, but it was a choice of crappy options in me. You can't very well be going around shooting the place up, and they certainly aren't going to see you and suddenly surrender. I'm sure you're good, but you're not that good. He didn't say it in a condescending way, but I didn't exactly look like special forces or anything, and I wasn't special forces anyway. I had some small advantages, but they would run out quick against a well-trained 12-man team that had trained together before. The lead scientist continued regardless of my pride. There are a lot of innocents here too, so we may have another idea. Take it or leave it. The words hung in the air, and the thought trailed off as they all nodded. It was like this had been at least partially planned well before I got here. Maybe I would be the catalyst the scientists needed to throw a kink in the Merc's plans. One scientist went and got a spare lab coat, while another took my backpack. The other returned and put a lab coat over me. It fit pretty well and covered up everything from my neck down to my boots. The scientists then gave me a funny look because I still had my mic and my hat on. I gave my hat to them and they tucked it in my bag for me. Seeing my rifle for the first time, he zipped the bag up and tried to push the thought away. I saw him see the rifle and our eyes connected, a lifetime of consequences suppressed into a single choice to let it go and move on. I pushed my mic around my neck, down enough to where it couldn't be seen, and hung my ear down to the side under the lab coat. I could talk, or they could hear what was going on as a last resort. I only wouldn't be able to hear, so I had to hurry. Then one said, "Here, take this," and it sounded as if he wanted to be helpful. Another, in response to the prompt of his counterpart, brought out a tiny green squirt gun and handed it to me carefully. It looked like the squirt bottles that replaced gun emotes on chat programs when social media started taking a huge swing to the left. If you can get close enough to them, squirt this anywhere on their skin. They won't like it. He took the bottle and primed it by squirting it into the sink a few times, then handed it back. One of them chuckled quietly under his breath at the dry humor. He got an elbow from his counterpart, and he turned and shrugged like, "What? They deserve this." The leader spoke calmly, as if this had no more importance than groceries to get at the store. "There will be 3 to 4 of them up on the first floor. Then radio to us and we'll come down and fill you in some more and bring your bag up to you. There is a comm station at their guard desk. We'll take you to the stairs. The rest is up to you." He nodded and I nodded back. I put the squirt gun in my pocket and felt the gravity of the thick liquid sloshing around in it. Then I took my notebook and my pen and followed them quickly to another set of stairs. They walked me to the stairs and said, "They won't know you from the rest of us, at least for a few seconds. Just use the same spiel on them and give them each a good squirt, then buzz us up. You'll know 'em when you see 'em." With only a minute left to come in, I thanked them as they opened the door for me, and then I went up to a double flight of stairs, up to the main floor. Chapter 18, Main Level. I didn't have any time to catch my breath and decided to let that play into the ruse. I intentionally opened the door with a force of urgency and had my pen and clipboard ready. I began forward within 2 steps and heard a "Hey!" I quickly spoke between breaths before they could process. "Just the man I need to speak to." The suspiciously Merc-dressed man said, "What do you mean? What are you doing up here?" He had a thick Russianish accent. His inflection was a mixture of anger and surprise. I replied back with authority, as if I was in a rush. "I need to talk to all of you immediately. I have a scientific survey that is very important. To make sure we get this last part absolutely correct. Is everyone here? Because I need to make sure I get everyone's input." He said, trying to keep up with responding to me and responding to his own internal suspicions at the same time. "Well, yes, everyone is here that's on this floor." By now, everyone had gotten close. Due to the commotion from their squad lead, or whoever he was, getting riled up. I could also tell that these goons were not the security team that belonged here. I had never seen these guys before. Spoiler alert, they were way too tan. Like pre-separation California tan. I thought to myself, come on now, guys. Californians, really? We hadn't seen anyone this far north from California Free State in months. I tried to not let my disgust show, as these guys were definitely mercs. So then I held up my binder to the first page and said, okay, it is really important. I need you to all tell me what you see here. I always have squiggles and doodles on the first page and random notes that aren't going to make sense to anyone. It's always a funny reaction because people think it's a joke, and instead of actually taking it as a threat, generally only get more pissed off. They all reflexively look in close as their brains try to process before the internal alerts would go off. I squirted their lead in the face first. Then I had left, trying to use my new meat shield as cover. I got 2 more in the face before the 4th, who was the most skeptical and back a little further, dodged my squirt attempts. That's when I took 3 rounds somewhere center mass. The wind was knocked out of me, but he made a rookie mistake. The shooter thought I was a normal lab rat, and training scars buried in his brain dictated that those 3 rounds should have stopped the threat. When I didn't go down, he hesitated for a split second, enough for me to squirt him right in his eyes and mouth. He quickly curled up into a ball, screaming in horror, dropping his pistol. I stopped and reassessed. Starting from the beginning, I started kicking weapons away and unbuttoning my lab coat, and then I noticed that there had been innocents around, but thankfully it looks like they had all gotten to cover in time. Everyone had all started to make it back from where they had jumped to when the shooting started, and as I got the coat ripped off and quickly got my ear in time to hear the crackle of comms. Convoy 2 to analyst, come in. Do you come in, analyst? We heard fire. Do you copy? Apparently I was close enough to the correct window to get a decent signal. Hopefully mine was strong enough to get back out as well, as I started fiddling with the radio connected to the front desk to get on the right channel. Analyst, I copy. Team 1. Wheezing in between words as my breath tried to come back to me. Finally, I got the radio to the right channel and started my routine. As they radioed back, I was going through belts and pockets, stripping the mercs of anything that can be used as a weapon. They reached convulsing white foam uncontrollably, and it didn't look fun. Every time I found a pistol, I would dump the mag, rack the slide 3 times, lock it back, and toss it. Same thing with all the AK pistols I found, and the various ARs and everything else that they had. I couldn't tell whose these were, but they were respectively ours now. What's the sit rep? They asked over comms. The response came back through my radio and the desk radio. It could alert more people, but I figured it was more important to let everyone in the lobby know I wasn't alone. I was taking control of the situation. I responded through my radio, which put some feedback through the center security console. I'm okay. Strangest thing happened. You wouldn't believe me. Give me 5. Be ready for soft vehicle entry. Over. Copy on the entry. Out. He sounded more like an air traffic controller than anything, as if this was all totally routine. It was good he sounded calm. I hadn't sounded as calm, but I had done my best to project calm. It wasn't any good keeping the secret now anyway. People on the other floors would have heard gunshots, and if they were monitoring channels, they would have heard everything. Hopefully we spoke vague enough to where we were hiding our numbers and capacity. I kept dumping mags, wrecking slides, tossing guns, checking belts, appendixes, chests, legs, sides, you name it, until there was about a pile of 20 guns on the floor. Not a bad haul. I looked around and noticed nobody was coming, neither near me or the frothing commies, and decided that it was probably okay for now. I looked around on the guard console and flicked the switch that said B1 and spoke into the mic. Clear to come up, guys. It was probably a direct line and couldn't be easily monitored, but it didn't really matter now. Within 30 seconds, the team of scientists were up checking on everyone and were very, very happy. Apparently, these bastards had kept them cooped down there for quite a while. The lead scientist asked for the squirt gun back, so I gave it to him, and he handed me my backpack in return. I got my hat back out and put it on. Then I took the lab coat off, now with 3 new holes, and brushed the bullet jackets onto the floor. The scientist stepped over and around the pile of guns and bullets, walking to each of the convulsive mercs on the floor, and gave them each another spray from the squirt bottles. That didn't seem very sporting, but what did I know what these scientists had probably been going through? I sure wasn't going to judge them in their own house, as it were. I got my rifle out of my bag, sprung the stock back out, and slung it over me, and I threw my backpack on, and that's when the crowd seemed to put two and two together. The mood instantly improved, building on the chatter they'd heard over the central radio. There were some high fives and yes. The lead scientist went over to the center console and flicked the switch numbered 5 and said, "Forward to bring up, and please bring down my other kit." "Right away," was all the other side said. Within a minute, there were collapsible gurneys starting to pick up the frothing bodies on the ground, and a new chemistry set being set up on the center console table. The doctor walked up to me and jabbed me with something and quickly took my blood and gave me a cotton ball to put on it. Then, on a dish on the table, he squirted in some liquid from the squirt gun. It was a thick, awful green. He then took the thing he jabbed me with and dropped a dab onto the dish that seemed to render it inert, which he acted like was no big deal, and he put a canister on top of the dish, which I realized was the bottom to a delivery system he had. As soon as the 4 people were tied to the gurneys, he sprayed each one of them, and then they suddenly got better. They still seemed really weak, though, so everything worked out. The lead scientist had 4 more empty cans, so 4 more cans worth were made and distributed to each of the scientists. He told one scientist to stay with me and took the squirt gun with him, and the other scientists spread out to start helping other people. I commented back to the team. "Analyst to comms, copy. This is comms, over. The team has a vehicle entry opportunity in 2 minutes, copy." There was a pause, and the CO, "Copy that, we are rolling out." I responded with "out." I looked over to the scientists and doctors. The doctors were taking the tangos upstairs in restrained gurneys, and the scientists were busy spritzing everyone with the new healing spray they synthesized. "Does anyone know where the legitimate site security is?" I asked, trying not to sound annoyed. Someone stepped forward. "I am one of their brothers. I heard the mercs took them all to one of the higher levels and locked them up. Are you here to save us, right?" "Sort of," I responded. "Do you know how to work these control panels?" He showed me how to do it once. Let me see." The young gentleman speaking to me came over, then thought for a moment logically through the steps. "Burst power has to get..." I heard thunder outside. It would be pouring soon, and I interrupted his fumbling as politely as I could. "Okay, you get that taken care of. I need to go down there to meet them." "Do they need to get sprayed with any of that stuff to be safe?" I asked one of the scientists. "Yes, they do," a man in a lab coat responded, trying to sound helpful and thankful. "Okay, if you can be spared, please come with me with enough spray and someone to explain to them what's going on. The rest of you, please stay here and look after our new security officer. Make sure the basement gate gets up and the bollards go down. In 2 minutes, please." I looked around and everybody nodded. Some people were heading over to the great gun pile I created to see if there was anything that interested them. I figured the scientists would keep them shooed away if they saw any activity they didn't like, and then we could handle it when we get back. Just then a merc security person came down from the stairs to see what the gunfire was and comm noise was about. He probably assumed the team down here had it well in hand. The scientist said, "Oh, thank goodness you've come." The merc's head jerked at suddenly being addressed by a scientist that shouldn't have been up here, only to get promptly squirted in the face. He fell to the ground, and foaming from everywhere ensued. I guess all the scientists had those squirt guns with the juice in them. With that taken care of, I went through the gear pile quick and found a decent-looking flashlight. I clicked it on and off a few times to make sure it worked. And then I motioned the scientists, and they assigned to me, and he came over. I handed him the flashlight so he would have a light, then we went back down to the basement. When we were done taking the stairs down to the basement, we headed out into the parking garage to meet the team at the entrance. Chapter 19. Reuniting with the team. The parking garage was dark again, going in. I entered first with my AR pointed forward, scanning for threats. Stock was snapped back out to full extension, flicking my light on and off as needed. It was really a moot point, though, because Mr. Scientist behind me was shining the flashlight everywhere and talking. Well, it didn't matter that much. There was no power down here, and nobody could have got by us. I wasn't going to be a hard ass at this point and boss him around. He was already being a trooper. Didn't want to demoralize him. The elevator had only ever been used once, which was for the doctors. There was no connecting stairs between the first floor and basement, so I was being careful merely as a precaution. The scientist I was with didn't seem to mind. I think he was happy to be out of his lab. There were no cats in the stairwell. They had finished their respective business and had gone back to playing in the huge parking garage. The scientist stopped and sprayed some of the antidote in their food and water. "I'm the vet also," he murmured timidly, trying to be informative. I checked my watch, and we had about a minute left. We were about halfway to the shutters when the lights turned on in a stagger of illumination. Half the lights, just enough to see. I let go of my flashlight's button and it powered off. I was able to sweep for threats. Even better now, actually being able to see. The white light made me an easier target too, though. I saw several of the cats looking back at us, laying around cleaning themselves and overall being indifferent. However, I'm sure if I'd had turkey, it would have gotten them up quick. As we got closer to the entry and exit bay, the cats started to figure out what was going on and wanted to go out. They started huddling around us, and the vet scientist I was with started spraying them all as best as he could. The cats didn't like this, but it seemed to hurt them. Within a few seconds, I heard 3 distinctive large engines heading towards the gate. Excuse me. I looked up to the ceiling and around. There were now blinking red lights, and so I noticed the security cameras. I looked at the cameras and pointed to the doors, then to my watch. A few more seconds go by, and I heard several large latches unchunk. I threw my mechanic's gloves on, got to the first slider door, and started running the chain to lift the door. Then all the cats streamed out in the wild, happy to go see what had been going on. For the last few days they had been cooped up. I see the 3 trucks coming, and I see that the bollards are still up. I go back to the camera, angled down at the entry, and point to the bollards and make a hand signal. It was a motion like trying to squish down a peg with one hand, squishing and 2 fingers, being a bending peg. I do that a few times, then pointed outside, and then ran back to keep manually opening the steel shutters. As the trucks pull up and everyone gets back out to form a perimeter, the bollards start slowly lowering. One of the guys gets out and gets to the other bay door to start ratcheting it up. The scientist vet I was with went to spray him. I explained as fast as I could, without sounding like it was a dire emergency. Everyone needs to be sprayed due to a toxic plant. I'll explain everything in a minute. Everyone hopped out and secured the perimeter, and the bollards completed their descent. The drivers drove their trucks in, and the team covered their entry. The team covered the vehicles from both sides and the back, and then followed the trucks in backwards. Once we were inside, we closed the shutters. The driver drove the trucks around in a circle to check the area and to get the trucks reoriented in the right direction to exit later. Leadership jumped out, and we all nodded, and the CO pointed to me. I started, "This is one of the scientists," and I motioned it to the scientist vet that had been with me. "They were being held hostage in another area on this floor. He has to spray everyone right away. There's a toxic plant in the area that will make you violently ill." Several people were already starting to not look good from exposure outside. The scientist vet approached the CO and he nodded and got sprayed. Our 3 drivers hopped out. Our CO said, "Get sprayed, toxic stuff around, is bad." They all nodded. Out of the 15 of us, he was able to spray about 10 before it started to run low. "I'm running out. We need to get back to the lobby on the first floor," he said after trying to shake it a couple times to get the last out that he could. One of the folks on my team that got sprayed started sneezing. I tried to not act alarmed. "Okay," I said then, "power's back. As a reminder, elevator from the sub-basement. Basement 1 only runs to the first floor. The other scientists are holding the first floor, but we need to relieve them and come up with the rest of the plan and finish the debrief. They know we're here, so let's shake a leg." Our CO took over and said, "Okay, thanks. 3 stay with the trucks, rest with us." The 3 that had been sprayed stayed with the trucks, and the rest of us followed back through the stairwell through the basement offices and up the stairs to the lobby. Chapter 20. Back at the main level lobby. We re-entered the main level lobby, and the scientist I was with quickly got the attention of some of the others. He singled out the folks that still needed spray and got them sprayed with the antidote. Then had them sit down. The tangos were all gone, and the pile O guns was still untouched on the floor, much to my appeasement. Their new unofficial security intern was at the guard station with someone else trying their best to figure everything out. There seemed to be less scientists than before, but enough to take care of our group. The rest of our team was thankfully able to recover thanks to the speedy actions of the scientists here. One of the scientists got on the internal PA and called up to the medical floor to send someone down to get our medical officer up to speed on what was going on. Our CO understood some of the science stuff, but was saying he wanted to hear it in medical terms also. It was pretty funny hearing them trying to talk. I asked where the rest of the scientists were. One of them explained that if he went up and secured the medical wing, basically they had gone up with medical personnel to explain what had happened to their comrades. The other floater security guard had made his way to the hospital floor and was very upset. Was asking a lot of questions about why his team was sick in the medical wing all of a sudden. Somewhere in the middle of the scientists explaining, the floater got nettle sauced right in the face. I was still struggling with the number to put with them. It sounded like a 16-man group, and we'd taken out about 7 so far, 3 per floor and some floaters. Our CO had stationed people at the elevator and main stairs, and had everyone started securing the perimeter while he checked the cameras. He also had 2 people inventory the firearms pile. We would probably split it with their team leader later, now that I thought about it. That seemed fair, but it wasn't up to me. I know some of the people on my team were already eyeballing the SKSs, though. So funny. There was a big question as to why the Op4 didn't have comms on them. I thought it was really weird. Usually we would have got on their comms and have been able to work out a plan that way, but they had no comms. That meant they had a different way to communicate, or they were on a schedule or something. Our CO offered to have our team secure the medical floor, but they declined, saying no bullets or guns on the medical wing. We all rolled our eyes without being able to help it, but we knew they had a point. Plus, if the tangos tried to take over the medical wing, they would all get squirted by the scientists holding the floor, and the white foam would ensue from everywhere, and that would be the end of it. The CO interrupted the tail end of my thoughts with a simple question. Do we know where local security is? I responded, they're being held on one of the floors. We don't know which. When I talked to 7 before we got here, which is comms, whoever we talked to sounded fishy, but our guys probably aren't on that floor because the tangos would want them far away from comms. I paused for a second to think, or just in case someone wanted to interject, and then continued. They're probably also not on 5, which is the hospital floor, because we would know about it. That at least 2, 3, 4, and 6 is the most probable. I thought for a second and referenced this handwritten doodle I'd been referencing that I made as everyone had been talking. Floor 2 maybe makes some sense because that's the closest to 1 and easiest to keep track of them, but maybe they would want a buffer and keep them on instead on 3 or 4 since that's right in the middle. I looked at my doodle some more, and the rest of them are probably on 6 because between the hospital wing and comms, so they can keep both monitored. It's probably just a handful on that floor, 1 or 2 max. I kept going since nobody had said anything, so I think they have 11 guys left. Probably 2 guys on the 6th floor and 3 per floor on 4, 3, and 2. And I think they only had 1 floater, and one of the scientists took them out immediately with a squirt gun filled with the juice. I think there was another floater on the hospital floor, but the scientists juiced them already. Someone in the back echoed softly, "Juice." I responded back quietly, "Juice." Our CO ignored the inside joke and asked a great question, one I hadn't thought of. "Where's the armory?" Our new security intern friend said, "We don't have a main armory. Each floor has a small one, each with its own locking system. No single person has access to them all. The bad guys never got access, which is why you don't see them with any of our guns or ammo. We all looked around and looked at the gun pile and nodded. That was a small relief at least, but no idea how long until the security team cracked. The head scientist calmed in really quick. He was heading upstairs. He was upstairs heading things up at the hospital. He said, "Everything's fine on our floor still. I don't think they'll come down to bug you guys because they don't understand the toxin and probably just think the first floor is infected now. They definitely know you're here, though. Don't forget that they will have probably seen you drive in and certainly heard gunshots. If anyone gets wounded, just get to the elevators and have the first floor buzz us when the shooting's done on the floor you clear. Try to keep collateral down, though. We don't have a ton of gauze and hemostatic." RCO responded, "Sounds good, and tell them thanks." The security intern relayed the message and looked at us intently for the next instructions. RCO paused for a few moments and began. "Most likely there are 11 of them remaining, as our analyst estimates, probably 3 of them on floor 2, 3 and 4, and 2 on 6. They don't have comms, we do. We have about equal numbers, but we're going to have to hit each floor at the same time. If we go floor by floor, we risk them getting past us if they try to make a run for either of the 2 other floors." I jumped in really quick. "Oh, and the fire escapes are all garbage. They won't be escaping outside at all." RCO nodded. Everyone was listening intently, so we continued. "We'll have 3 clear floor 2, 3 clear floor 3, and 3 clear floor 4 simultaneously, as well as cut off the exit. Comms will stay here to coordinate. Medic will be in the main stairwell with analyst watching the stairwell to call out movement, and can be rapid fire team if anything happens on those 3 floors." One of our former armies says, "I don't suppose we have floor plans." Everyone grumbled. The general consensus back from the people who lived there was that it was mostly cube walls for shared living areas. The hardwall offices had been turned into tiny bedrooms. There had been new additions made since the last official construction, but no effort to keep up a floor plan. Plus, it was something they definitely wanted to work on. I thought to myself, that would be something I was interested in helping with later. RCO mentioned it's good to always remember then about over-penetration. Please choose any shots you have to take carefully, even if the other side is not doing so. Everyone nodded and buddied up. We'd all practiced clearing rooms and buildings 100 times, but there was always that thing you could just feel in the air. That excitement, everyone felt it. Years of practicing in kill houses for fun, and team building finally paid off in one way or the other. Everyone took drinks from their water, and so did I. I folded up my piece of paper with my tower drawing and put it in my pocket, and then we headed into the stairwell, rifles pointed up, scanning for threats. Chapter 21. Everyone find your floor. We went up the stairs as quiet as we could, heels and toes and slicing the pie. One would stay at the floor level and everyone else would go up the stairs. Someone would stop and cover the above threat area. The person from below would catch up and someone else would stop at the next set of stairs and maintain cover. The traveling overwatch continued until 3 people were at each of the floors they were supposed to be. So 3 people had buddied up and stopped at floor 2, 3 more stopped at floor 3, and the last 3 stopped at floor 4. While this was happening, Medic and I looked around to find a spot where we could see up to the ceiling and to the floor and the best we could and find some cover. There was such a spot where there were some facilities machinery close to the 4th floor that had been reinforced with steel and concrete pylons. So that is where we prepared to wait. It only took a few more seconds for comms to start. "Listen up, we breach in 10. Only radio if you need something. Good luck, copy?" 2 copies came back, 1 from each of the other entry teams. Everyone looked at each other and thumbs up. I looked at Medic and said into my mic, "Copy also." We both nodded. The Op 4 could have been listening, but it honestly didn't really matter. Mic check was more important. They knew we were coming, only really 2 options. Both side hunker down forever, full speed engaged. They had hostages, so it was obvious. So with that, the countdown started. We all looked at our watches, and in 10 seconds, 3 doors went flying open, and in our guys went. Thankfully, the doors hadn't been affixed with early warnings or traps, possibly due to our speed. There hadn't been a time to assess and react. We could hear commotion for a second, but then the doors closed behind and everything went quiet. We waited 30 seconds, then a minute, and then 2. Both Medic and I scanning floor 2 and 3, then looking up both with our rifles and eyes, half expecting someone to come out of 6 to maybe run up to 7 or vice versa. A third minute went by, which seemed to last forever. I thought back on my first real mission with Medic when we were running security at a big event before the collapse. It was to keep both sides of the protesters safe from each other, but the protesters don't really care about that. Leo, or law enforcement, had welcomed us and was working with us 100% of the entire mission. The mission was to guard a gazebo at the bottom of a park, which is what one of the groups had a permit for. The other group, which was about 30 to 50 anarchists, had threatened to come shut them down by any means necessary. I was with Medic and 2 other guys at the upper parking lot with a bunch of Leos. Then about 20 anarchists decided to come right at us out of nowhere with 2x2 boards about 6 feet long and 2x1 boards about 1.5 feet long. They were trying to get down to the gazebo where some speeches were being held. Leo, to their credit, held the anarchists back until something strange happened. The anarchists turned right around and went and hid under a bridge, which didn't make any sense. They waited about 5 minutes and came back, and when they came back, Leos did nothing to stop them, and the black mask-clad kids completely overran us. I had anticipated this, though, and had radioed ahead where the team members met us halfway to get us down safely with the rest of the group who was waiting. It was a good thing, too, because all I had was a can of pepper spray with me that I didn't even know how to use at the time. Pretty sure I had my K-bar at the time, but it would have done absolutely no good against 20 guys with 5-foot-long carpentry product. But what we had was this great team of guys with great comms, coordination, and courage. At that point, we were able to hold our ground with equal numbers, and Medic was able to render aid to the people who the anarchists subsequently wounded in their violent attacks. We weren't permanent teams, though, and everyone melted away after the event to go about trying to make it their day-to-day again. So here I was again with Medic, as those tense seconds ticked by, and we looked at each other again, then up the stairs and back down with our rifles, just wondering what was going on, staying quiet. Then we heard over comms, "Floor 2 clear, 3 in custody, over." Comms downstairs affirmed the message. The 10 seconds went by and I started to get anxious. Maybe 30 seconds later, there was a second message over comms. "Floor 4 clear, 3 in custody, over." Comms downstairs responded back to him also. I heard what I didn't want to hear, a gunshot. But it was just a single gunshot, maybe a pistol gunshot, but hard to tell from here as it was far away. Maybe someone taking out a hostage taker mid-sentence as he was beginning a monologue. "Floor 3 clear, 2 in custody, 1 DOA, over." That was our CO talking. DOA meant dead on arrival. I'm assuming the leader took their own life instead of being captured. Then we heard something from up on the 6th and 7th floor. We quickly pointed our rifles as best we could while covering each other and tried to get decent angles and cover. I called it in. "We have motion on 6th and 7th door." Only the doors opened. But we couldn't see anything else, so we didn't move. We didn't shine our flashlights or try to make any movements because we didn't want to give away our positions. Then we saw white t-shirts coming out from both doorways. I screamed, "Hands! We want to see your hands!" They must have assumed from seeing us enter the building and the other floors that we were pros, and must have assumed the gunshot was their boss taking their own life and that there was no point in fighting. "Hands and slow!" I yelled. Just then one person from floor 2, 3, and 4 each arrived, rifles low, then raised up at what they saw. Someone else took over from there issuing commands, and we covered them as they got to floor 6 and zip-tied the captives, and then got to floor 7 and did the same. Our guys asked over and over, "Is that everyone?" Both captives said yes, yes, nervously. One of our guys started patting them down for IEDs while two more covered. We carefully cleared the 6th and 7th floor anyway. I got rotated in to clear 6th floor. Everything was going fine until I went to check one set of rooms where everything was a dark blue hue unlike the rest of the building. I felt very neutral, like I was neither welcome nor unwelcome, until I got to the kitchen, which had a red hue. I immediately felt horribly unwelcome, and suddenly an extraordinarily large cat started yowling at me, and I leapt off the kitchen counter and chased me out of the kitchen and out of the living room. I blinked and suddenly was back outside the set of rooms as if I'd never gone in. Simply looking at the door, I wouldn't go in. Medic tried the door and it was locked. He knocked and nobody answered, so we kept going. Chapter 22. Debrief time. Another team member cleared 7th floor, which had comms on it. Our comms guy then transitioned up there, and the security team, which ended up being on 3, ended up dispersing through the building. They were fine, only treated for minor bumps and bruises. The tangos didn't rough them up too bad, thankfully. The remaining captured Op 4 had played it off like they didn't have any weapons. Had played it off like they didn't have any weapons, which they did, only well hidden. That's fine. I didn't think we expected the security team to fight off a well-trained group like this anyway. I have a feeling, though, like this ordeal would have the security team at the building rethink their mindset and protocols. Basically, what it sounds like happened was this. The facility was trying to work on the toxin situation, and this enemy group was able to easily take advantage of the situation. People were sick, they were coming and going more often, trying to figure out what to do about the plants, and it made the security plan too weak. There was no way to keep the building locked down, which was the primary security procedure. Lock down, then call for help. No way to radio out without alerting the world that they were weak. Seeing how we came in and took care of things professionally and as ethically as possible, building management offered to start taking training from us and would change their procedures. Our CO thought that was a great idea and that we would work it into the rotation, and that he just needed to work out the details with our public outreach officer, so they started talking details for a bit. Around that time, Medic wanted to go up and visit the hospital and see if he could trade for a few things, which is one of the activities he looked forward to whenever he came here. They were well stocked with supplies that he couldn't get from the normal trade hub that was local to us. He asked if I would come, and I said I would. Also, with security freed up, there was security back down in the parking garage now, so our whole team was up on the main floor. Our XO was also negotiating with their chief security officer about who got which firearms. I noticed the pile was about 4 times larger now. I noticed the SOCOM 16 in there and quite a few more SKSs and a SPAS 12. And a handgun that wasn't paling in comparison next to the Eagle next to it. It wasn't in the 1911 pile, so it must have been an FNX 45. Very cool. These guys had been crazy loaded. Geez, I wanted them all, but I knew there was a lot of people that still needed to get upgeared. Sometimes I simply had to sit out the loot fest. I don't want to be around hearing them all negotiate over that stuff. The longer I stayed and looked at the pile, the harder it would be to get over later. Yeah, medic, let's go check out the hospital wing, I mumbled sadly. At least someone would be getting cool guns today. Mine were plenty cool though, but not that cool. Oh well. We headed towards the stairs to go to the 5th floor. Chapter 23. Reluctant Reception. We asked anyone if they wanted to go with us, but nobody wanted to go. I looked back and the security team had accepted their new intern, and his older brother was extremely proud of him. People sure grew up fast, and cross-training was important. Good for them. So, away we went. Everything being safe and secure, we didn't cover each other or anything like that. We just went up the stairs normally. Everyone saved the elevators for emergency and because of power. This place ran off a combination of hydro, solar, and wind. They could use the elevator a couple times a day with the battery reserves and a weight system. The lights stayed off in most places during the day. The building had been specifically designed to be certified to a high environmental standard. One of the things that meant was that the building let in an unusual extra amount of light, the maximum amount of hours in the day possible. It also meant the building generated nearly all of its own power. As we went up the stairs, I thought to myself about the power setup. Everywhere outside was wind generation, and the entire roof had solar panels set up. The solar panels all had special rotators where a tiny amount of power was used to move with the light to capture the maximum amount of light possible. Even in cloudy days, the solar panels could gather quite a bit of energy for the batteries. The only time they needed to be maintained was if it snowed, when people would have to go up there and sweep the snow off. There was also a big water turbine that went to the river nearby. This provided the third power income that the building got. With all three together, the building was able to run comfortably on modern 365 days a year. The control board on the first floor had switches where everything could be turned on and off in sections. So, for example, when the basement lights weren't needed, they could be shut off. They had a couple of walk-in fridges and freezers in the kitchen area on the first floor. Those could be managed. Everything else was in the basement so it could stay naturally cool and dry. Humidity wasn't an issue because the building had vents that dehumidified the basement. The surveillance system didn't use a lot of power. There wasn't really television or anything big and electronic for entertainment. If anyone had portable gaming systems or tablets, they were all expected to charge those using their personal solar panel charging systems. There was a big market here for trading portable games. I had to sell my collection off way before the collapse to be prepared for it, so I only had a handful and what I was able to download onto my system before the internet got severed. I still carried my portable gaming system with me though, so I could tag everyone. And it was so amazing to see the kids' faces light up when I walked by and all their green lights started blinking. People started coming down out of the stairwell now that they knew it was safe and they weren't being held prisoner anymore. We got quite a bit of thank yous, waves, smiles, and I even got a nice solid high five from someone. Must have been really irritating to suddenly be stuck on your floor out of nowhere, but hey, everything's fine now. Adults were adults, and it was probably the kids that got the most confused. They would want to play and go back to their routine and start to get upset, and, well, you know the drill. So I thought about how happy they would be now. Especially now that they could go back to playing their handheld games with each other like they used to do. Most importantly, now that the weather was getting better and it looked like a cure was possible, the kids could maybe even play outside more. Some of the kids had started to trickle out in between and around their parents to see everything that was fine and back to normal. Some of them even had their little handheld systems out, and they all started blinking. I held my gaming system out to and waggled at them, which was blinking also. They looked at me like, holy crap, he has one. I looked at them and winked as I passed. It was sort of an old school reminder of how things used to be. They could all share how they passed one of the security guys and show my avatar in their system off to their friends. So I always made sure my system was at full charge when I came here and tried to pass as many kids as I could. I had seen several out playing already and had hoped to pass a few more. Thankfully, any rough and tumble clearing basement hadn't bashed it up too bad. It was basically indestructible, which was good. There were always some kids up in the hospital recovering from something or the other. I put my handheld gaming system away and thought some more. Maybe I could go brighten their day or read them a story while Medic trades for whatever he does. I think he was saying he needed more tubes and bags for IVs or something. I looked at him and he was smiling and waving at everybody also. When we got up to floor 5, we looked up at floor 6 and saw more people. We stepped back for a second and smiled and waved at them also. They smiled and waved back, and by now people were starting to congregate between the floors again like they used to. Before going into the hospital, I took a second to look up to see what was going on at floor 7. That floor was dedicated to communications, and it seemed like people were happy to be able to get back into that room right away, probably to get back onto the radio and tell everyone what's been going on. I know the hams up there live on the radio, like everyone else used to live on the internet. They must have been going crazy, unable to get on the radio talking to all their buddies. I'm glad the radio operators got to be back at it, because one of the neat services they provided here was getting people certified for their ham licenses. Yes, even though the Pacific Northwest had broken off from the rest of the country, Since ham could go all over the world, all of the amateur radio operators kept the tradition going. I actually thought it was a good idea and supported them. Normalcy was good. The operators would give people the test here and train them and everything. Then the veteran ham operators would radio out to their friends all the information, and voila, you could get your own call sign. They would even print you out a little official card and everything. It was quite the honor to get your ham license with your call sign, just like how things used to work before the collapse. The test was a little more easy and practical now, of course, but it made everyone happy. The ham operators would share the radio waves with us, and we got to use them per their rules agreed upon. And we all set up infrastructure cooperatively, and amateur radio was a self-policing outfit like it always had been. No need for outside interference. Good things done for the right reasons, just like how it was supposed to be. Things were starting to feel normal here again, so we went into the hospital. Chapter 24, Hospital. We walked into the hospital on floor 5, and things looked like they had been chaotic, but we're starting to wind down. The lead scientist and one of the doctors walked over to me and wanted to talk, and I waved to Medic and said I'd see him in a bit. He said, "No problem," and headed off to go make his trades. As he walked off, I chuckled to myself about his huge Medic backpack that made him look like a fighting turtle from childhood cartoons. He knew what I was thinking and said, "Cowabunga," to me and raised a fist in the air. I returned the cowabunga to him, and we parted ways. The lead scientist and doctor took me down a couple of sections, and I noticed a girl sitting alone with a hydration bag. When they sat me down a few more rooms down, I asked who the girl with the hydration bag was, and they didn't know who I was talking about. Then they called the nurse in. They wanted to do more blood. They wanted more blood to make sure they had enough blood to deal with their toxin issue. I said that was no problem and asked if they could explain. They said they didn't know, but were just thankful that they had these new medical units that could easily turn the antidote they made air-based and save everyone. They started taking blood pressure, which I hated and hurt like hell. I started rambling like I always did and suggested maybe they just try spraying the plants. They looked at each other and thought I'd offended them, but then they said they would try. I also said that goats would eat nettles if they're dead. Meaning if the nettles were dead. They could try spraying a goat, chopping the stuff down and feeding it to the goat, and maybe give the goats a taste for the nettles. Who knows? The veterinarian scientist heard me and started taking notes also. Since I was rambling without even thinking, I suggested maybe we should go to the hub for them and see about getting them a goat. Then it's time for them to draw their 3 to 5 to whatever things of blood. I never count. I pulled out my second flashlight to hold on to so I could distract myself with something. Then they put a giant rubber band on me for a wannabe tourniquet, which also hurts. Then they poke around trying to find a vein they like. This is normally when I would start talking about cats. I said, "Hey, I love your guys' cats." It didn't take them any time at all to find a vein, and then I forgot all about it. The vet scientist responded back, "Thank you. Not only do they keep everyone happy here, but they keep the birds back, which is good for our gardens, but they also keep the mice and rats back, which is good for all the nasty viruses those rodents have. It also keeps the mice from eating up the interior of the cars. We take good care of the cats, and everybody knows they are absolutely not for food." Then the psychologist doctor continued, "They are also to keep us safe and for emotional support. It is a great relationship, and they don't take up hardly any food, and the litter is easy, all biodegradable. They stay clean, we give them their shots, spay, neuter, etc. Sometimes new cats want to join up, or someone will bring their own. If we have room here, the cat collective accepts them, and then we just take care of the new cats, and the old cats show them the ropes. Pretty cool system." That was the end of the blood draw, and the needle got pulled, twice in one day. Ugh. Then I got a cotton patch over where the needle had been, and then a piece of medical tape over that. A droning throb began on my arm that I hated so much. I would thankfully forget about it soon enough. I responded about the cat cycle, and that was very cool. Then I thought about all the help and ideas I'd been offering. That's when I realized that I probably should be running all this by the CO first. and that I was probably overextending our relationship a little bit. This is what happens when I start consulting. The ideas start running, and I hope someone writes them down, because it's like a faucet with no off switch. So I look at them, and they look at me, and then they're all finished. They try to give me a cookie, and then I say, "Does it have vegetable oil in it?" They laugh at me, and I laugh with them, and we all laughed, and someone's electronic speaker laughed. Then I ate the cookie. There hasn't been vegetable oil in months. That stuff used to absolutely kill my stomach, and now it isn't even around anymore. So I ate my cookie, and they gave me another one. Medic came back and said, "All done." "Me too," I said back. I asked if we could do one walk through the place before we left, and the doctor we were with said he would walk us through. Maybe it was the loss of blood, or maybe it was the old world versus the new world, but I started seeing everything in a sort of duality. I saw a child sitting there with a hydration bag, and I'd blink and see someone laying there on their deathbed with a breathing pump and 50 things plugged into them to monitor. We walked past the next one of a nurse helping someone eat food who was recovering, and I blinked and saw someone completely unconscious with a feeding tube. A sign next to them said they had been in this state for years. I blinked more times and everything was back to normal. It was going this way in every area until we got back to the beginning where we had originally walked in. The receptionist asked me to come around and look at something. Everything turned into slow motion, and where there had been only desks and cabinets before, there were half-naked people submerged in water, unconscious, all around her. There was one body suspended in a tank in place of her overhead bin above her desk. There was another one in place under her desk. There was one to her left also taking place of the counter, all with monitors silently monitoring their life support status. With a green tinge of light. I blinked a few times and it would not go away. She turned to me and she looked old and evil. She had scraggly hair and dark patches under her eyes, asking me if I had a problem. I took a few steps back and the people submerged in the water didn't go away. But they weren't there when I had originally came in. I didn't understand what I was seeing and it wasn't going away. A girl I had walked by when I came in shuffled towards me, connected to her hydration bag, suspended on a metal pole on wheels. I was frozen in place and unable to move. She gave me a hug as much as she could with the rubber hose stuck in her arm attached to a bag on a metal pole and said, "Everything's going to be okay, you'll see." Her strength waning as she held me as tight as she could. I looked up over her head out the window where there should have been a forest and river. There instead was the Pacific Ocean and a ship drifting at sea. The moment seemed to stretch on for hours. Chapter 25, the following weeks. Home, stronghold 6 months after the collapse, late spring, early summer. We ended up getting back home okay after the plaza fueled up our vehicles. While we were gone, some people had shown up to our hamlet that were very random, probably scouts. They saw our FUDs in full camo, though, standing in solidarity with our residual tactical team. The visitors must have reported back to whoever that they didn't want any of that because they were never seen from again after that day. Community building was a good thing. Our CO agreed that we would get the plaza a couple of goats and drop them back by on our next trading hub visit. Someone echoed, "Goat, no, my goat," in the background, pretending to yell in English. Everyone got a good laugh at the inside joke. The great gun pile was split fairly evenly and everyone seemed happy. What to do with these tangos was sort of a dilemma. Two were given an option. There wasn't a lot of extra room, but there were room for 2 or 3 extra people at the plaza. There was a man and woman couple that said they never wanted any part of the Raider life and that they were ready to give everything up. Nobody specifically had anything against the Russians. They'd been living in peace pre-collapse in the Pacific Northwest for years and had integrated quite seamlessly. The leadership at the plaza agreed to take them in, but all trust had to be completely rebuilt. It turned out the gal was the Julie that had been speaking to us over comms. We gave her points for actually answering comms and sneaking us a little intel, which helped their case a little. It turned out that sneaking us the intel had been kept a secret from the rest of the Raider group. There would be extra scrutiny for a while on the two new folks, but if they played their cards right, they would have a great place to live. We took the rest of the prisoners back with us to drop off in the other direction and point them towards the city and never turn around. We told them if we ever do see them again, that would be it. They had no skills and no redeemable anything that we wanted. They were all looters and raiders, plain and simple. They had been sent up here to take over whatever they could, hold out, wait for reinforcements. We wanted to send a clear message back. Don't mess with us. Don't look for us. And don't ever come back. We took multiple pictures of all of them also, which they didn't like. We told them that not only would they be dead, but everyone they came with would die also by association. And we would immediately assume why they were there. So we kicked them out a few miles outside the city and tell their friends that we weren't worth the effort. We heard later rumor that they were all shot and killed trying to re-enter the city. Reason being that their support convoy leadership had an escalating disagreement with the city leadership over who would get the future theoretical loot versus who would get the facility. I guess nobody cared about us, as usual, and that's probably the way it was going to be for a long time. Epilogue. With our closing flag ceremonies out of the way and the after-action report written and submitted, I went to my tiny home to go to bed. My cat was happily waiting for me. I checked the food and water, and both were reasonably fine, but I topped them off anyway and patted the cat. I got the full sniff download from the cat, which made the cat very happy at the new information it gathered. I put my handheld gaming system in its charger that my cell phone also plugged into. The solar panel portion of my charger had been charging all day, which would be enough power for both for another day. I turned the handheld gaming system off to conserve battery life, and I would check for all the tags I got tomorrow. If the handheld batteries ran out before I shut the system off, I'd lose the tags, and that'd be no good. So off it went. I checked my phone, no messages or emails, of course, because cell phone towers had long since been without power or connectivity to the wider net. I scrolled through all the pictures and got really tired and shut my phone off as I drifted to sleep. I wasn't sure how long I'd slept, but I awoke to a cat scratching at the door that wouldn't stop. I tried to block it out, but something about the futility of claws on steel that won't quit gets you awake in a hurry. Alright, that was the end of Book 3. I will now read an excerpt from Book 4. This is an excerpt from Chapter 4, Anastasia Adrift. An urban and oceanic survival story by Chance Paladin. Chapter 1, Waking Up. Home stronghold 8 months after the collapse. Late summer. I wasn't sure how long I'd been asleep, but I awoke to a cat scratching at the door that wouldn't stop. I tried to block it out, but something about the futility of claws on steel that won't quit and gets you awake. I opened my eyes and remembered that I wasn't in my tiny home on my farm anymore, but a little ways out on the Pacific, in a luxury super yacht that was dead in the ocean. What was I doing out here again? I couldn't remember, and I started to drift back to sleep. Then an alarm started blaring from all directions at once.